Chapter 1394. Chip, you still haven't found that bastard? Beat. Panoramic scan and terrain matching initiated. No abnormalities found at the moment. Recommending host to use the law of fire as the core to cast fire wave ray and conduct a scan fire wave ray? Is this the application of the law of fire that you just derived? Yes. After stepping past the 4th rank and entering the 5th rank, it can be said that the body of a magus has undergone a qualitative change. Past battle methods and methods are no longer suitable for enemies at the level of a grand magus. Hence, discovering and deriving high-grade applications of the power of laws is a top priority. Otherwise, the host will lack the means to deal with enemies at the level of a grand magus. Grim nodded his head silently. This mysterious enemy had hidden himself so deeply that the will of the plane would send him a warning. All these signs pointed to the possibility that the other party was far beyond the scope of an ordinary enemy, and was a terrifying rank 5 opponent. Who could it be? Medusa, the Magus Association, or the Silver Alliance? If it was the Magus Association, with such powerful reinforcements, they would have prioritized Deep Ink Valley. Why would they send them to the center of the continent? He had an agreement with the Silver Alliance before the war. As long as he did not harm their interests, they had no reason to send such a terrifying opponent. From the looks of it, could it be another assassin sent by the great witch Medusa? Grim cursed inwardly at the thought of this. It could be said that his rough and bumpy journey was almost accompanied by the various conspiracies and calculations of the great witch Mesa as he grew up. If he had the ability and the opportunity in the future, he did not mind dragging that despicable fellow down from her pedestal and ruthlessly stomping her into the mud. Only in this way could he vent the anger in his chest. "Send me the spell model of the fire wave ray," Grim ordered in a low voice. In the next second, an abnormally large amount of data surged and churned in his mind, quickly forming a three-dimensional and complicated spiritual model. There were 1,027 magic circuits, 368 energy nodes, and 13,119 rune lines. The runes involved covered the 3 major systems of arcane spells, magic spells, and magic, and there were 689 of them. Such a complicated spell formation was only one of the simplest probing spells among the rank 5 spells. One could only imagine the difficulty of other rank 5 spells from this point of view. More importantly, the tier 5 spell wasn't powered by the magical elements of the past, but by the power of laws. This also meant that even if this spell model was given to a grade 4 magus, he would not be able to cast it. Although Grim had already refined the law of fire, his mental power was clearly not up to par. With the help of the Fire God's Bead, Sherfong might be able to control the Tier 5 spell in advance. However, if he wanted to display the true might of a Tier 5 spell, he would most likely have to wait until he reached Tier 5. Since the AI chip had already deduced the flame light wave, Grim received all the information about this spell when it was transmitted to his mind. This also meant that even though it was Grim's first time casting this spell, he was already very familiar with it. It was as if he had cast it thousands of times before, and there was not the slightest bit of unfamiliarity or sluggishness to it. After closing his eyes and pondering for a moment, Grim, who had turned into a 1,000-meter-tall giant, suddenly opened his eyes and used his terrifying spiritual sense to issue an order. "All magi present, enter the wizard's pagoda immediately." Without any explanation or preconditions, Grim's order was quickly transmitted to the minds of every human magus who were busy around the space crack. Although they were a little confused, no one dared to question the orders of a powerful being. Therefore, in just a quarter of an hour, the densely packed space rift had become completely silent, and not a single person could be seen. "Congness, are you going to hide or stay here to watch the show? There's an uninvited guest here, and I want to force it out." Grim's spiritual force quickly connected to the demigod Lich Congness. He was currently on a high ground, taking out a small and exquisite alchemy item and tossing it onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded into a magic laboratory that spanned 100 meters. Hearing Grimm's question, he straightened his body in shock. The soul flame hidden behind the large ruby in his eye sockets scanned the area, but he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. It can't be. Not only does Grimm have terrifying offensive capabilities, but his detection abilities are also better than mine? As he cursed, he snickered coldly. Do whatever you want. I won't participate. To be honest, he also wanted to see how Grimm was going to force an enemy that he couldn't even detect to show himself. If he could learn a thing or two about the usage of high-ranked energy, it would be worth it even if it had to take some risk. Grimm didn't try to hide anymore after getting Comnus's answer. He lowered his huge body and scanned the empty battlefield with his bright eyes. He said in a deep voice, "Honorable guest, are you going to show yourself or be forced out by me, The land was empty, and only the exposed charred black bedrock of Swangor revealed the horror of the previous battle. Come out then!" Grimm roared and raised his hands. An unusually large spell formation appeared around him. An incredible amount of flames surged out of his palm, transforming into balls of strange ripples that looked like both light and fire, quickly spreading in all directions. It didn't have the terrifying aura of an extinguishable flame. Instead, it carried a strange ripple of laws. Everywhere it went, the sky remained the sky and the earth remained the earth. Nothing in the world changed, as if the ripple of laws didn't have any destructive power. However, the strange thing was that when the light flowed to the old warlock's feet, the laws of fire within it clashed with the defensive spells around his body, triggering a strange reaction. It was as if he'd used a potion. The old magus appeared on the spot and entered Grimm's and Comnus's perception. "There's really someone." That was Comnus's first reaction. The ripple of flames was strange. It actually made the flames exhibit the ripple of light. Could Grimm have mastered the law of fire? That was Comnus's most honest reaction. The old magus who suddenly appeared was just as surprised as Comnus. His mouth was wide open and his eyes widened. He looked at Grimm's raised hands and the spell formation around him as if he'd seen a ghost. No, even a ghost would retreat in fear upon seeing the old magus. Only a terrifying specter at the 4th grade or above would be worthy of the old magus's attention. Grimm once again felt the pain of being in a non-human state. His 1,000-meter-tall body looked majestic, as if he could pluck the clouds from the sky with a wave of his hand. However, it would be a great sin to try and talk to the old magus. Grimm bent down and scanned the old magus with a cold gaze. When the wave of flames brushed against the old magus, it was the power of another law that repelled it. That meant the inconspicuous fellow before him was a true magus of laws. He seemed to be stronger than Grimm in terms of age and strength. That made Grimm even more wary. He quickly copied the old man's appearance in his mind and compared it with all the known experts of the magus world in the AI chips database. However, he couldn't find anyone that matched. Grimm and the old man stared at each other for a moment before a warm smile appeared on his face. "May I know who you are? Why are you spying on me?" Even though Grimm had suppressed his voice, the mutation of his huge body still made his voice rumble like thunder. When the sound rolled across the ground, even the exposed bedrock around the old wizard trembled and buzzed. "Looks like he was right. I shouldn't have come back." The old magus shook his head and sighed. Immediately after, he raised his head and stared at Grimm, asking with a strange expression, "Kid, how did you learn that spell just now? If I'm not wrong, you've had the law of fire for less than 30 days. I don't think that's enough for you to learn a grade 5 spell, right?" Others might not know, but as a great magus who had lived for thousands of years, the old magus naturally knew how difficult it was. If a person's soul underwent a qualitative change, they would need at least 10 years to adapt to it. Not to mention abandoning the low-grade energy of the past and using the power of laws as the core to create a brand new spell. Even the old Magus had spent 100 years before he had painstakingly created his first rank 5 spell. Perhaps only he knew the hardships and frustrations he had gone through. Now that he saw a fellow who could cast a grade 5 spell with a wave of his hand, he naturally had to look at him like he was looking at a monster. Could it be that there really were Magus geniuses in this world who could learn without a teacher? However, even a genius Magus could not be this heaven-defying. This completely toppled the old Magus worldview. To solve the problem in his heart, the old Magus squeezed out a benevolent smile and said warmly, "Kid, as long as you tell me honestly how you learned this rank 5 spell, I can guarantee that I won't cause trouble for you today." Sure enough, he's here to cause trouble. Grim sighed and his expression gradually turned serious. "What if I don't tell you?" Hee, then you'll definitely regret your choice." The old Magus sneered. For some reason, the moment his expression changed, he could faintly affect the heavens and the earth to rise and fall along with him. Chapter 1395. What were laws? This eternal question ran through the entire sorcerer civilization. Some sorcerer sages naturally had simple explanations and analyses of this. However, such content had always been classified as high-level knowledge in the sorcerer civilization. Ordinary low-level members naturally had no way of knowing about it. Those sorcerer sages believed that laws were some of the operating principles and basic structures of a plane. Every plane had the ocean of magic as its foundation, the core laws as the world's framework, the secondary laws as the internal veins, and the laws derived from the laws as the flesh and blood of a perfect world. According to this theory, the more laws a plane could bear, the larger it would be, and the higher the plane's level would be. The sorcerer world was an almost perfect high-level plane, possessing a complete system of laws. Hence, the sorcerer world had a very high status in the multiverse, even becoming the main plane of the Kiliacosm. The stronger the sorcerer world was, the more individuals it nurtured would be able to break through the limits of the plane's level, becoming a true powerhouse that transcended the plane. However, it had to be said that success was due to laws, and failure was also due to laws. No matter how big the sorcerer world was, the number of laws within it was still limited. This also meant that there was a limit to the number of super-ranked sorcerers it could bear, and it was impossible for it to expand without a limit. There was once a sorcerer sage who went through tens of thousands of years of experiments and research, and came to a basic conclusion. The total number of laws in the sorcerer world should be between 2,000 to 2,300. Each carat was a pit. In other words, the entire sorcerer world could only bear a little more than 2,000 super-ranked individuals. The top buildings of the sorcerer civilization were occupied by these 2,000 super-ranked sorcerers. Once all the laws were occupied, future sorcerers would not be able to advance without the use of laws. If these latecomers wanted to advance to rank 5, they would either have to fight for the control of a certain law with a certain almighty sage, or think of ways to increase the number of laws in the plane and fight for a chance to advance. Of course, those sorcerers who were lucky enough might encounter an almighty sorcerer who had fallen in the depths of the sea of stars. This way, the origin laws that they controlled could be released, and a new rank 5 sorcerer could be squeezed in. There were so many rank 4 sorcerers in the sorcerer world, but only a few could advance to rank 5. Why was this so? The main reason was that the path ahead of them had already been taken by others. The other party had thousands or even tens of thousands of years more experience than them, so it was simply wishful thinking for them to take control of the power of laws from the hands of the sorcerers. Hence, if the Magus world wanted to develop and strengthen, it could only embark on the path of slaughter and conquest. Plundering goods, people, souls, resources, and knowledge from other planes. With more of these things gathered, it would naturally nourish and strengthen the sorcerer world's plane origin. The strengthening of the origin would give rise to the corresponding rules of the world, which would also give those who came after a brand new path of development. Therefore, the laws and the plane were one and the same. The more powerful the plane, the more rules it would nurture, and the more individuals that could use the rules to grow. In this way, they would be in an advantageous position when fighting outside. Furthermore, the more dimensional entities went out on expeditions and pillaged, the more powerful the dimensional world would be. It would also be able to nurture more rules for its internal members to develop and strengthen. The two complemented each other and complemented each other. Only then could it develop and expand like a rolling snowball into an almost perfect plane world. The reason why Grimm was able to receive preferential treatment from the Sorcerer Will and stand out among the many Grade 4 sorcerers was because of this. It had to be said that this was directly related to his passion for planar wars over the past hundreds of years. The essence of the Goblin Plane and Lance Plane had all been swept into the Sorcerer World. The knowledge obtained by the Arcane Kingdom, the introduction of the mushrooms from the Spirit World, the unification of the Central Continent, and the resistance against the invasion of the Abyss. Perhaps Grimm could not count all of these, but in the perception of the plane consciousness, they were all great contributions he had made to the development of the Sorcerer World. Each and every one of them might not be that eye-catching, but when they were piled up together, it was enough for Grimm to gain the favor of the plane consciousness, which made it easier for him to control the laws of the world. Hence, Grimm's current achievements were both accidental and inevitable. However, among the many laws of the world, there was a difference between the main and the branch. The inextinguishable flame that Grimm controlled could only be regarded as a small branch of the law of fire. If he wanted to develop in the future, he would have to seize the laws of fire from other planes and fuse them to strengthen the branch of laws he controlled. Of course, if he had the chance to peek at the main branch of the law of fire, that would be great. However, the Sorcerer World had existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and the main branch of the law of fire was definitely in the hands of some almighty sorcerers. Grimm's action of peeking at the law of fire would definitely cause them to retaliate and become hostile. Hence, when Grimm chose to step on the path of a fire magus, there were already many enemies in front of him. However, he was still too weak in the past and could not arouse the vigilance and fear of his enemies. However, once he stepped out of the Sorcerer World and became a Grade 5 Fire Magus, he would have to be careful of the attacks and hatred coming from the shadows. Although Grimm had not controlled the law of fire for a long time, it did not mean that he knew nothing about the origin and current state of the power of laws. On the contrary, with the AI chip's powerful data storage and retrieval abilities, Grimm's understanding and knowledge of the power of laws were far above that of most Grade 5 Magi. Hence, the old Magus in front of him only had to use the power of laws a little, and Grimm immediately obtained a lot of useful information. At the very least, he knew the system of the other party's power of laws. That was water. The other party grasped the law of water, which was adept at using soft power to counteract the opponent's ferocious attacks, and it also had a supportive effect. Water was the bane of fire. It seemed like the enemies behind the scenes had calculated everything. From these clues, Grimm could faintly see traces of the Great Witch Mace's manipulation. The enemies that should come would always come. Besides, it was much better to place the battlefield in the Magus world than in another plane or in the outer regions. Hence, after confirming the other party's enemies, Grimm did not try to rope them in. His enormous body burst into flames with a bang, and he suddenly raised his mountainous flaming hand and slammed it down. Whoosh! A violent explosion sounded. Before the giant flaming palm fell, the exposed bedrock around the old wizard suddenly caved in, revealing a huge palm imprint that seemed to be carved by an axe and a knife. The palm print was 3 meters deep, and there were burn marks everywhere. From afar, it looked like Grimm's palm print. The old sorcerer calmly stood where he was, and a powerful and strange force protected the space 2 meters around him. The bedrock he was standing on did not cave in like the surrounding area. It stood firmly in place like a nail. The old Magus's staff trembled, and a hole seemed to open up in the void beside him that led to the depths of the ocean. Light blue water essence surged out from within. The essence of water flowed around the old sorcerer and quickly condensed into a water giant that was constantly expanding. It raised its two blue arms and blocked the huge flaming hand that was slapping down rapidly. Grimm's flaming hand and the water giant's arms collided. After an earth-shattering explosion, a frightening energy ripple quickly spread in all directions. Everywhere it passed, all life was annihilated, and everything was turned into powder. Even the Magus, which had barely survived the battle between the abyssal alchemists and Grimm, could not escape this time. Wherever the energy ripples swept out, the rocky peaks crumbled and the rocks shattered, turning into a mighty shock wave that swept out dozens of miles away. However, the fire giant and water giant in the center of the battlefield did not move at all. The giant flame hand and the water hand were stuck together, the two opposing power of natural order constantly crashing, colliding, and annihilating each other, releasing the elemental destruction that could not be dispelled in the form of energy ripples. Around the battlefield, the war wizard's pagoda, which had just been repaired a few days ago, suddenly exploded with an elemental barrier. Then, the unconcealed energy shock waves lashed at the war wizard's pagoda like long whip. In less than 10 seconds, the war wizard's pagoda broke into pieces, turning into piles of ruins. As for the wizards from the Arden family, if they did not escape in time, they would not have been able to escape. The wizard tower on the horizon was like a traveler who was struggling to move forward in the face of a fierce hurricane. Its whole body was shrouded in dim yellow violent energy shock waves, and it struggled to hold up a force field protection and elemental barrier, barely preserving its existence. As for the demigod Lich Congenas in the middle of the battlefield, his body emitted the aura of two kinds of power of laws, one white and one light blue, which turned into an indestructible light membrane that blocked the energy shock waves and the dispersing power of laws. Even though he was in danger, the demigod Lich Congenas' soul fire was burning with excitement and agitation. He stared at the battlefield in the distance without blinking, using all of his mental perception to detect the changes in the energy and laws of the two powerhouses. His anxious expression made it seem like he was fighting bravely on the battlefield. With the protection of the water giant, no matter how Grimm activated the fire energy and the laws of fire, it would be difficult for him to hurt the old wizard. The old wizard calmly raised his head and sneered, "Little guy, don't you have the virtue of respecting the old and loving the young? You attacked me as soon as you appeared. Then I'll show you the real power of laws." Chapter 1396. Before this, Grimm had imagined the true nature of battles of laws countless times. However, due to the scarcity of information, there had never been any reliable information that could be used as a model for research. Today, however, this old magus was like an enlightened teacher, seriously teaching Grimm how battles of laws should be fought. However, the price Grimm had to pay for this was too high. Mixing the power of laws into elemental spells would undoubtedly increase the lethality and penetrative power of the spells. This was what Grimm had always done in the past. However, this was the first time he'd encountered a battle of laws. A strange power of laws that was as soft as water but incomparably tough extended from the old magus body, penetrating into the laws of the magus world. It then stirred up the laws there, guiding the terrifying power of laws towards Grimm's soul along with his flames. The other party's actions caused Grimm to break out in a cold sweat. No matter how conceited or powerful he was, he could not possibly go against the laws of the entire magus world by himself. If he did not have a way to deal with this, the stirred laws of the world would turn into a torrent of laws that would instantly crush his consciousness and soul. When that happened, his will as the legendary fire Magus Grimm would cease to exist. Beings of laws that had crossed worlds were indeed terrifying. Their familiarity with laws far surpassed Grimm's, as well as their brand-new battle of laws. They were practically crushing him in a domineering manner. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, Grimm was communicating with the AI chip in his mind. Suppression of laws. This is an effective method used by veteran magi of laws to deal with newbies using their techniques and experience. The method of operation is: quickly jump through laws and penetrate with your will to draw the opponent's attacks into the world system, using the backlash of laws to launch a counterattack. The AI chip silently recorded the old Magus methods of using laws, calculating and deducing the changes of the battle. Is there any way to deal with this suppression of laws? Grimm did not care about these minor details, only concerned about how to deal with them. There are 7 ways to deal with it. 1. Divide a portion of your spiritual power and create a fire clone to be independent. Temporarily cut off the spiritual connection between the main body and the fire clone, sacrificing yourself to attract the backlash of the natural laws. Note: the success rate of this plan is only 63%. 2. Use the same rules and will to guide the opponent's attack into the world system, borrowing the power of the system to resist the rules controlled by the target. Note: the success rate of this method is only 45%. 3rd, borrow the power of the Book of Darkness and the Divine Fire Orb to forcefully withstand the backlash of the laws. The estimated success rate is 79%. Additionally, the main body's soul will be partially shaken by the laws. There is a 21% chance of light injuries, a 77% chance of serious injuries, and a 2% chance of direct death. For the AI chip reported 7 solutions in one go, but most of them were methods to evade or resist. After all, in a situation where there was an extreme lack of information on the laws of war, the AI chip could only deduce battles based on the information it currently had. It was unable to display the powerful advantage of controlling the battlefield like it had in the past. Grimm weighed the pros and cons and quickly made a decision. We'll use the second method as a way to confront it head-on. Also, be prepared to deal with the third and first option. If we lose the battle, immediately execute it. Over the years, Grimm had gained some understanding of the structure of the world's laws. He knew that everything in the world was derived from different levels of laws of the world and the laws of planes. The main body of the world was made up of laws, but they were derived from the laws of planes that people could come into contact with. Such a structure meant that when one's consciousness passed through it, it would be disturbed by different levels of laws, and the consumption would constantly change. This created a huge variable that was hard to calculate. The general concept of laws jumping meant that when 2 magi of laws clashed with their consciousnesses, they would constantly jump from one level to another, or from one law to another. The medium in the middle was ever-changing, and the way laws could be triggered was ever-changing. With the power of laws they grasped as a carrier and their consciousnesses as the main force, they were like 2 surfers wantonly colliding with each other in the world's system of laws. If one of them made the slightest mistake, it would cause the backlash of the world's system of laws, and they would be at a disadvantage in this battle of laws and consciousnesses. However, if Grimm did not want to dance with his opponent's footsteps, this battle would become a one-sided fight. His opponent had a terrifyingly huge world's system of laws behind him, and any law attack he launched could be guided into the system of laws. This way, his opponent could attack Grimm without any restraint through the world's system of laws, and Grimm's hands and feet would be tied, so he did not dare to recklessly fight back. With this method, the old Magus could almost crush Grimm to death with only a small amount of energy consumption. This was a terrifying method. What the old Magus did not expect was that the legendary fire wizard Grimm did not even hesitate for a moment before charging into the world's system of laws. A novice Magus who had not even broken through wanted to play a war of laws with him? The old sorcerer laughed and immediately controlled the law of water to attack Grimm. On the battlefield, the fire giant that Grimm had turned into and the water giant formed from the essence of water did not give way to each other, and they were locked in a stalemate. the terrifying world incinerating heavenly flames, and the monstrous waves collided in a frenzy, causing a chain of explosions to transform into energy ripples that turned the entire battlefield upside down. It was as if the void of this plane was going to be torn into pieces. On the plane of laws that no one could see, the two's consciousnesses were tightly entangled, controlling the power of laws to crazily jump about in the world's system of laws. Under their disturbance and agitation, the world's rules rippled incessantly, and the operation of the rules that were originally like thousands of gears that were biting together gradually became turbulent and uneasy. In general, under the collision of laws, Grimm would undoubtedly suffer more backlash from the world's laws. However, contrary to the old Magus expectations, although Grimm was only a novice, he did not have the ability to fight back. Although he was not as familiar with the operation and evolution of laws as the old Magus, he was still able to do it well, and the old Magus could not find a weak point that could be defeated in one strike. Just like that, the two of them continued to fight on the plane of laws, gradually causing a huge upheaval in the world's system of laws. At this point, both of them were feeling a little regretful. Although the plane's consciousness had given Grimm great care, this care did not come without a price. As one of the culprits who had disrupted the plane's system of laws, Grimm sensed the flow of the plane's feedback in his body as he fought. Yes, as a punishment for disrupting the world's operation, every second he stayed in the system of laws would cause the plane's feedback to disappear a little. It could be imagined that if he did not stop after the plane's feedback was exhausted, his life force would be consumed in the next moment. After all, the plane's consciousness was fair. While it was punishing Grimm, it did not spare the old wizard. Looking at the old Magus' face that was gradually turning purple, Grimm could imagine the old Magus' conflicted feelings of pain and happiness. The only thing he did not know was what price he had to pay to deal with the backlash of the plane's consciousness. Grimm was really curious about this. A terrifying battle of laws had turned into a contest of strength where both sides spat out blood. This was no doubt out of the two parties' expectations, and it made the demigod Lich Kongnus, who was watching from the side, exclaim in satisfaction. In truth, such a terrifying battle between magi of laws was a forbidden zone that no one dared to step foot in. However, this did not affect Kongnus, who had the austere winter chest to protect him. He held up a two-colored barrier of laws, blocking all attacks from the elements, laws, and laws. It was an eye-opening experience for him to watch a high-intensity battle of laws at close range. He was currently at the peak of Grade 4, breaking through to Grade 5. Being able to understand and grasp the workings of laws in advance would undoubtedly be beneficial to his future development. As such, even though the two of them were fighting fiercely and the world was shaking, Kongnus was still in high spirits. He could not wait to make the battle even more intense. "I'm done. I'm done." The old Magus was the first to give up before Grimm ran out of plane feedback. He was the clone of a Grade 6 Magus, after all. He had paid a huge price to infiltrate and return to the Magus world. The price he had to pay to maintain such a level of power in the Magus world was far greater than what Grimm had imagined. Both of them were in the same plane, and their strength was suppressed to the peak of Grade 4. However, Douglas originally thought that he could crush Grimm with his advantage in the laws of war. Unfortunately, although Grimm was a newbie in name, he was very experienced in dealing with the situation. He had actually mastered the workings of a battle of laws without a teacher and dragged the old Magus into a battle of attrition. This was going to cost Douglas his life. He was just a peak Grade 4 clone. How many resources and energy reserves could he bring in? If he could not suppress Grimm quickly, he would not be able to afford a battle of attrition. No matter how strong his main body was, the amount of energy he could transmit into the Magus world was limited. If this continued, he would suffer a great loss if his clone was devoured by the laws of the Magus world. Chapter 1397. Grimm had gained a lot from the War of Laws. Although it was a great loss, it was still worth it. At least, Grimm understood what the so-called War of Laws was. Looking through the history books, the sorcerer world had given birth to nearly 10,000 great wizards above grade 5 over hundreds of thousands of years. Among so many great wizards, there should be more than 2,000 who walked the path of law-defying wizards. This meant that the sorcerer world was close to the limit of the number of law-defying wizards it could accommodate. It would only be more difficult for the wizards who grew up to become law-defying wizards, and it would not be easy. Bloodline wizards focused on the bloodline, striving to purify the power of the bloodline and trace it back to its origin. They wanted to use the power of inheritance to restore the ancient glory of the source of the bloodline. At that time, laws had not existed, and all things had just been born. There were countless creatures in the multiverse that could destroy the world with a wave of their hands, and each of them was tyrannical. Therefore, the ultimate goal of bloodline wizards was to restore the glory of the source of the bloodline. Body-refining wizards were famous for their strong bodies. They were the typical representatives of those who valued the body over the soul. They pursued the most extreme method of body refinement, tempering their flesh and blood into an immortal body, so that they could resist any external attacks. Although they called themselves wizards, every move they made was like a group of warriors. The so-called witchcraft was just a tool used to aid in battle. Arcane wizards pursued the pinnacle of alchemy. They did not care about their own bodies, nor did they care about the cultivation and strengthening of the origin of the soul. Instead, they spent most of their energy on alchemy and the creation and strengthening of arcane puppets. They often used arcane puppets as their main bodies, placing themselves in a subordinate position. It was said that the founder of the Silver Alliance, the extremely powerful Grade 9 arcane wizard Patrick, was known as the Creator. He had arcane puppets that did not lose out to ancient beasts. The arcane puppets he created all had terrifying power, but they were so exquisite that it was difficult to tell the real from the fake. He had played a part in the Silver Alliance, being able to stand tall for tens of thousands of years. As for law-defying wizards, they were the pinnacle of wizards and spellcasters. After all, magical elements were only at the end of the energy system. In terms of power, they could not be compared to the origin of the power of laws. Therefore, when the elements were cultivated to the extreme, sooner or later, they would also embark on the path of controlling laws. However, there were only so many basic laws in a complete plane world, and most of them were secondary laws derived from these basic laws. They could also be seen as branches of the basic laws. As for the laws, they were even lower. They were the supplementary laws that were derived from the combination of secondary laws and plane space. Basic laws, secondary laws, laws. It was precisely these things that were intertwined and linked with each other to form their own laws, allowing them to construct numerous multicolored and extremely dazzling planar worlds. Magi of laws were the most powerful existences that the Magus world could produce. The source of every law-defying wizard's power came from the origin plane. Although most of their growth came from plundering other planes, the most fundamental part was still deeply rooted in the origin plane. That was why so many law-defying magi left the Magus world to explore the depths of the endless sea of stars. Usually, they weren't too enthusiastic about meddling in the internal affairs of the sorcerer world, but once the sorcerer world was in danger, they were duty-bound to rush back to help. After all, if the sorcerer world was destroyed by others, their roots would be broken too. This was undoubtedly very frightening to the great wizards who had already grown up. Therefore, among the three major Magus organizations in the sorcerer world, the Magus Association was the strongest. Why was that? This was because the Magus Association had produced the most law-defying magi, and they were also a group of powerhouses who were most concerned about the current situation of the sorcerer world. Law wars were also a new form of combat that was derived from within the group of law-defying magi. They used laws as a carrier and their consciousness as a guide, making full use of the close connection between laws to roam the world's laws like a group of surfers. After all, the power of an individual was insignificant. However, once they could borrow the power of the world system, an individual's power could instantly be amplified tens or even hundreds of times. That terrifying power was simply not something that ordinary beings could withstand. Everyone's mental state was different, and the power of laws they could control was also different. When traversing between different levels of laws and laws, there would always be differences in what they were good at and what they were not. In a battle of the void will, not only did one have to compete in strength, but they also had to understand the technique, especially when it came to sticking to and suppressing the opponent. This also gave the law-defying magus a chance to dodge and move, giving them a chance to win. However, this was only possible because of the upper limit of the sorcerer world's power. Once Grimm was kicked out of the sorcerer world, the old magus would not use such complicated and exhausting methods to fight him. Who cares about the strength of the laws? Who cares about the techniques of using the laws? I will use my unparalleled strength to destroy your body and annihilate your soul. At that time, all the ingenious laws and techniques would be useless. Even the carrier was gone, so where would the rules come from? That was why Grimm could not help but sigh in admiration at the wonders of the world. Without the sorcerer world's blessing, no matter how talented he was, he would not be able to resist these terrifying powerhouses that came one after another. Of course, he did not want to reveal the demonic fish bloodline that he had just achieved. Right now, he had already become the target of everyone. Who knew which corner of the world was hiding enemies who were eyeing him covetously? As long as he had a trump card that could turn the situation around, Grimm would have the confidence to stand proudly in the central continent and continue to fight against these powerful magi. The old magus obviously had the upper hand in this battle of laws. He withdrew his mental force and instantly broke free from Grimm's entanglement, occupying his body once again. Grimm frowned and roared, "Do you think I'll stop just because you said so? Since you're here, you can stay." With that, he did not even give the old magus a chance to say anything. He opened his mouth wide, and a raging stream of golden flames pressed down on the old magus like an earth-shattering fire cloud. The old magus was so angry that smoke was coming out of his nostrils. He wanted to immediately summon his main body from the outer realm and slap this bastard who did not know what was good for him. However, he knew that for great magi like him, returning to the sorcerer world was like smuggling. There was a limit to how much power they could bring into the plane at once. Since he could not quickly kill this legendary fire magus, he should quickly escape. If he really got entangled here and something happened to this avatar, Douglas's reputation would be tarnished in the outer realm. A great rank 6 magus had sent out his clone, but it had actually been killed by a little fellow who had not even reached rank 5. If news of this were to spread, it would immediately become a stain that Douglas would never be able to erase for the rest of his life. At the thought of this, Douglas could not help but shiver. The water giant roared and turned into a torrent, breaking through the huge screen of fire that Grimm had set up. It swept up his body and quickly disappeared into the horizon. Grimm did not give chase after the other party after chasing him away. Instead, he stood there silently, as if thinking about something. The AI chip was currently communicating with him in his mind. "Have you found out about this old man's background? I've already looked through the information of all known great magi, but no matching data was found," Grimm muttered to himself, not finding it strange. At rank 5, their lifespans were usually thousands of years, and some even used special methods to live for tens of thousands of years. Hence, it was almost impossible to calculate the number of great magi who had left the magus world in the past hundreds of thousands of years. Even with Grimm's status as a rank 4 magus and his control over the central continent, the AI chip's database only had 20 to 30 great magi. However, most of the information was incomplete. Many of the great magi in the database had not been in contact with the Magus world for hundreds of years. Whether they were dead or alive or where they were, no one knew. Even if they died silently in some ancient ruins or in the depths of another plane, the Magus world would not know. At present, the number of great magi who still maintained close contact with the central continent could be counted on one hand. This included the great Magus, who had just left the Magus world less than 800 years ago. Compared to the total number of great magi who had left the Magus world, such a small amount of data was like a drop in the ocean. It was normal to not be able to find anything. What is the law? He grasped. Grimm asked in a low voice. After such a long battle, the power of laws from both sides had intertwined, and they naturally had a certain level of understanding of each other. Hence, it was reasonable for him to analyze the law that the other party grasped. A secondary branch of the law of water. The law's characteristic is water pressure. It can use the special properties of water to transfer weight, creating a terrifying pressure in a certain area. Moreover, the water giant that the other party created wasn't ordinary water, but water essence that had been purified and tempered many times. It has a powerful amplification effect on the law of water. Water essence? Grimm muttered to himself. In most Magus laboratories, this would probably be classified as a high-grade material. Seeing how easily the other party had created a 100-meter-tall water giant with a wave of his hand, it seemed like he did not value it much. A 100-meter-tall water giant would weigh at least 40 tons. If its body was made up of water essence, its weight would increase by 10 times. It was no wonder that the other party could fight against his 1,000-meter-tall body with a 100-meter-tall head-on. As Grimm lowered his head in contemplation, the Grade 4 Magus Andrews flew out of the Magus Tower and carefully approached him. The earth-shattering battle of laws had obviously given him quite a fright. Andrews did not know when, but he could no longer see this legendary fire Magus as someone of the same generation. In front of him, even a Grade 4 Magus like Andrews trembled with fear and trepidation. "Yes?" Grimm asked in a low voice. Chapter 1398. The Sorcerer Association was in big trouble. The parchment was a letter asking for help from Domner, the vice president of the Sorcerer Association. When Grimm received this letter, the other two sorcerer organizations would have received similar messages as well. Grimm's gaze focused on the parchment, which flew out of Andrew's hands and hovered in front of him. As the parchment slowly unfolded, the images of the spells stored inside were also unfolded at the same time, showing Grimm a terrifying scene that happened in the Black Ink Valley. In the depths of Black Ink Valley that stretched for thousands of miles, a multi-headed snake lizard with a body of over a kilometer long crawled out of the ground. It was covered in dark green scales. As soon as it appeared, it raised its head and let out a strange, ear-piercing screech, its body emitting a dark green glow. The glow covered an area of 100 meters, and all wizard beasts and monsters within it would quickly fester and turn into puddles of purplish-black liquid. Around it were 3 Grade 4 sorcerers, 2 men and 1 woman, dressed in the robes of the Sorcerer Association. The female sorcerer was Grimm's acquaintance, Grimm's Gloria. Of the 2 sorcerers, one was an old acquaintance of Grimm's, the poison sorcerer, Savorius. The other sorcerer looked unfamiliar. 3 sorcerers, 3 powerful sorcerers. The 3 powerful sorcerers from the Sorcerer Association surrounded the terrifying multi-headed snake lizard, fighting it madly. Behind the monster, there was a large group of beasts that looked like monsters charging out of the mist in the valley. They had the wings of eagles, the heads of snakes, and the bodies of lions. Their bodies were filled with a disgusting smell of filth. Mutated beasts. They were mutated after being contaminated by the Disaster Lord's disaster aura. Their individual levels were not high, most of them were Grade 1 or 2, but they had the advantage in numbers, to the point where there was no end to them. Judging from the number of mutated beasts that were spewing out of the Deep Ink Valley, It could be inferred that the disaster lords must have connected the valley crack to a plane contaminated by the aura of disaster. Then, they drove all the mutated beasts born in that plane to the sorcerer world. This was a common trick of the disaster lords. They would first create a crack in space, then drive the countless creatures of disaster over to wreak havoc. Regardless of whether these creatures of disaster were dead or alive, their existence would pollute and destroy the laws of the plane around the crack. Once the laws of the plane were damaged to a certain extent, it would be time for the disaster lords to send out their high-level subordinates. The dark green Hydra lizard could barely be called a lesser disaster lord. It was either a clone of the real disaster lord, or a high-tier fighter it had enslaved. Either way, their appearance would be a disaster for the sorcerer world. Other than the Hydra lizard world, snake lizard world, there was a multi-headed snake lizard in the Sorcerer Association. Their basic strength was already at the pinnacle of Grade 4, and their true form was most likely a terrifying Grade 5 creature. In order to deal with these lesser disaster lords of the disaster lords, the Sorcerer Guild Alliance. The Sorcerer Association Grimm's Sorcerer Alliance. Wizard Lord, Sorcerer Grimm, Sorcerer God, Sorcerer had, and Sorcerer Demon had sorcerers. Even so, the situation on the battlefield was not optimistic. A horde of mutated beasts crawled out of the depths of the Black Abyss Valley, charging and attacking the wizard's pagoda and the wizard troops around the battlefield like a dark cloud. The intense battle spread from the sky to the ground, then to the trembling underground. It could be said that the entire area within 30 miles of the Black Ink Valley was completely occupied by the mutated beasts. The Sorcerer Association army could only retreat to the perimeter of the War Wizard's pagoda. With their backs against the elemental barrier, they fought bravely against the endless stream of mutated beasts. The War Wizard's pagoda was surrounded by lightning, and bolts of lightning descended from the sky, turning large groups of mutated beasts into charcoal or ashes. But even so, they could not defend against the tide of red and black beasts. These mutated beasts could fly and burrow into the ground, and their bodies were covered in hideous bone armor or scales. Ordinary elemental wizard spells would not be able to kill them. Only powerful wizard spells at or above level 2 could slightly restrain their frenzied attack. The Wizard Association also had an ample supply of cannon fodder. Teams of wizard beasts of all shapes and sizes, each emanating a strong aura of bloodline, emerged from the wizard's pagoda under the command of the Association wizards. They also bared their fangs and brandished their claws, bravely fighting against the tide of mutated beasts without fear of death. On the battlefield, the tragic scene of wizard beasts and mutated beasts fighting to the death could be seen in almost every region. It was precisely because of the alarming number of mutated beasts and the 3 powerful lesser lords of disaster that the Wizard Association could not break into the Black Ink Valley even if they used all their strength, much less purify and dispel the filthy aura on the battlefield. The projection of the battlefield on the parchment only lasted for a short 15 minutes, but the information revealed was enough to send chills down the spines of the spectators. Grimm did not know what the others were thinking, but he knew that if the creatures of disaster had chosen to invade the space crack, the center of the continent would have been filled with mutated beasts by now. Of course, it was much more difficult to pass through the space crack than the Black Ink Valley. In order to accommodate the evil, twisted bodies of the Lords of Disaster, it would take at least half a year of contamination before they could enter the wizard world. This was also the main reason why they had chosen the Black Ink Valley and not the space crack. After the projection ended, the parchment shrank back into a scroll and returned to Andrews's hands. Grimm frowned and said coldly, "Why did the Wizard Association send this over? Do they want us to send troops to help? They've probably forgotten what they did in the central continent." Andrews's face was pale, his mind in a daze. He was clearly still immersed in the tragic projection. Hearing Grimm's question, he hurriedly bowed and replied, The association not only sent this parchment, they also sent a level 3 emissary. Do you think we should meet him? After witnessing 2 terrifying battles in a single day, Andrews found it hard to bear even with his mental strength. Let him come. I'd like to hear what the association has to offer. Grimm could not be blamed for his resentment. If not for the Wizard Association's interference, the matter of unifying the central continent would not have become so troublesome. If not for the fact that he had gained the upper hand and his strength had increased far beyond his enemy's expectations, his hard work over the past few hundred years would have been for naught. A white light flashed from the wizard's pagoda in the distance. A handsome and elegant young wizard wrapped in a layer of white light quickly flew in front of Grimm. Although he had already seen Grimm's imposing figure from afar, he still felt a shiver from the bottom of his heart when he walked up to Grimm's face that was as intimidating as an ancient giant's. Level 3. The level 3 strength that he was usually proud of was not even worth mentioning in front of this legendary fire wizard. He had a feeling that the other party could kill him as easily as crushing an ant with just a slight movement of a finger. The young level 3 wizard in the Wizard Association's standard robe quickly bowed to Grimm and said in a muffled voice, "The Association's envoy, Germain, sends his greetings to the great Lord Grimm." In the sorcerer community, words like respect and greatness were not to be used carelessly. The word respect was often used for high-ranking wizards, while the word great could only be used for great wizards. This was an unspoken rule. No high-grade sorcerer dared to break this boundary and enjoy the respect of the great sorcerers as a grade 4 sorcerer. Great? Grimm snorted coldly. Are you trying to make trouble for me? The young wizard quickly explained, Lord Grimm, please don't misunderstand. I have no intention of framing or scheming against you. This is what Lord Domner told me before I came. I must treat you as a great wizard when I see you. Domner. Grimm smiled. What did he send you here to say? Lord Domner said that we had some misunderstandings before, and that's why we had some unhappiness. As for Lord Grimm's loss, the Wizard Association is willing to compensate you. This young level 3 wizard was obviously a man with money and power. He had a soft body, and his posture was extremely humble. He looked like he was welcoming people with a smile. Compensation? Forget it, Grimm said coldly. As long as the Wizard Association doesn't interfere with the affairs of the Central Continent in the future. If you're here to apologize on behalf of the association, then go back. You don't have the right. The young wizard's face stiffened, but he quickly forced a smile. Don't be in such a hurry to chase me away, Lord Domner. I have something to report to you. Speak. This. The young wizard Germain looked around, and saw Andrews standing beside him as well as the demigod Lich standing not far away. He finally clenched his teeth and said, Lord Domner said that he hopes that Lord Grimm can help the association overcome this crisis for the sake of our previous friendship. Haha, Domner sure is humorous. Grimm almost laughed out loud. I know that I've let you down, Lord Domner, so Lord Domner asked me to bring this. The young wizard Germain's heart was pounding from Grimm's laughter. He took out a small rectangular wooden box from his pocket, and respectfully presented it to Grimm. First it was Severus, and now it was Gloria. Grimm had always remembered these two gifts. Now that the association was in trouble, they still dared to ask for help. This undoubtedly confused Grimm. Chapter 1399. Grimm grabbed the small wooden box and opened a corner of it. After taking a glance at it, he closed the box expressionlessly and sealed it again. Due to the presence of a force field, no one could see the contents of the wooden box through the distorted space around him. Grimm did not return the wooden box. Instead, he opened a spatial rift and placed the box into a small flame space that he had created. At his level, normal storage items could no longer be used. Storage belts and space rings could not withstand the power of the law of fire in his body, so he could only open a small flame space to store some important items. As long as he was not placed in a strange environment with distorted space, a small space that could be opened and closed at any time with a unique flame brand on it was more convenient and practical than normal space items. This can only stop me from pursuing the evil deeds you've done. There's nothing else to talk about. Stay here for now. Grimm thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, I still have some things to take care of here. When all the grade 4 magi in the central continent are gathered, I'll discuss with them about reinforcing the association. Lord Grimm, please forgive me for rushing you. The association can't afford to wait. Wizard Germain pleaded with an anxious face. Before I left the association, the Dark Ink Valley was already on the verge of collapsing. That can't be. Andrews could not help but refute. Although the calamity creatures are coming at us fiercely, the association has a strong army. It shouldn't be a problem to hold them off for a year or two. Wizard Germain laughed bitterly and said, logically speaking, that's true, but is there something you haven't told us? I'm telling you, this is the central continent, not the territory of the association. We have no obligation or responsibility to help you defend against the invasion of the other side. So, if there's anything else you haven't told us, you better tell us first. Andrews said with a fierce expression. His family's territory was the most vulnerable in the central continent. If Grimm really wanted to send reinforcements to the association, who would be left to guard the Great Spatial Rift? If it were a few days ago, he would still have the confidence to fight against the invaders from the other planes with the resources and foundation his family had accumulated over the past few centuries. However, looking at the current situation, peak planes like the Abyss and Disaster planes were wreaking havoc in the Dark World. A measly Tier 4 Magus like himself really couldn't handle so many frightening enemies. Therefore, if they wanted to reinforce the association, he would be the first to oppose it. Hearing Andrew's question, Germain's expression changed. In the end, he gritted his teeth and explained in a low voice, It's not that I want to hide anything, but the situation there is really not looking good. If there were only those 3 lesser calamity overlords, our association wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Most importantly, in the deepest part of the Black Ink Valley, there seems to be a strange monster. Its combat power isn't strong, but it has an abnormally terrifying corruption ability. So far, 1/3 of the wizard beast troops that our wizard association has sent to the battlefield have been corrupted by that monster and turned into mutated beasts. Directly contaminate your wizard beasts on the battlefield and turn them into mutated beasts. Grimm suddenly interrupted and asked. Yes. It's because of that monster that the situation on the battlefield has become so bad. If we can't kill this monster in 10 days, I'm afraid the association will have to give up on the Black Ink Valley and retreat to the headquarters and a few other core territories. Germain's face was full of fear. It was obvious that the monster had left a very terrifying memory in him. Only creatures of laws can do this. Grimm nodded. Without the protection of the same laws, the more normal creatures there are, the easier it is for them to be corrupted by the monster. Now I understand why Domner asked you to come to me. He probably wants to borrow the power of laws on me. Indeed, my lord. Germain saw that Andrews had already guessed it, so he nodded and admitted it. Lord Domner also said that if you are willing to do it yourself, our association. At this point, Germain suddenly stopped talking and used a spell to communicate with Grimm. It seemed that he was promising Grimm some kind of generous conditions. A moment later, Germain returned to the Arden family's wizard pagoda alone, leaving behind the 1,000-meter-tall Grimm, the demigod Lich Kongnas, and Andrews at the edge of the space crack. While Kongnas wasn't a native of the Magus world, he had a basic understanding of the Magus continent after all that time he spent studying it. Seeing Kongnas leave, he was the first to ask, "From what I know, you don't have a good relationship with the Wizard Association in the past. What resources did they use to make you change your mind to help a bunch of enemies? Isn't it better for you to stay in the central region and watch as their territory is turned upside down? Sapphira. 2000 Sith Sapphira. Grimm said calmly. 2000 Sith Sapphira. What a generous gift. But a look of disbelief appeared on Calmness's crystal skull. If you say you agreed to help them because of this Sapphira, I won't believe it even if you beat me to death. They are your enemies. If they are greatly weakened by the disaster invasion, I believe it will be more beneficial to the central region. Andrews did not interrupt, but he seemed to agree with the demigod Lich's wisdom. The Wizard Association was too powerful, so powerful that it could go against the entire wizard continent. If they could really use the disaster invasion to make them vomit blood, the Silver Alliance, the Northern Witches, and the newly risen Central Region would be happy to see them suffer. Grimm laughed. If there was no mana wave and it was just a simple disaster invasion, I would naturally watch from the sidelines. But now that the mana wave is raging, if the Lords of Disaster really invade the wizard world, it will be extremely difficult to chase them out. As a member of the wizard world, I have to answer the call of the plane's consciousness and chase away the invaders. Grimm's sudden change in attitude made the other two speechless. However, from the sneer on the demigod Lich's face, it could be seen that he did not believe a single word that Grimm had said. Grimm didn't take offense and secretly sent a few words to the demigod Lich. That's right. That's how I should act. I knew you had some kind of scheme behind the scenes. Kakik, I'm relieved now. The scarlet flames in Calmness's eye sockets danced excitedly. Leave the message to me. I promise I'll send it to that lord as soon as possible. Kakik. Andrews was at a loss. He didn't know what the two terrifying existences before him were plotting. However, he was certain that anyone who was tricked by a law-defying wizard and a demigod Lich must be very unlucky. Very, very unlucky. Andrews, don't stay here any longer. Inform all the Grade 4 wizards in the Central Region and have them come here for a meeting. The time limit is 2 days. Those who don't come will have to bear the consequences. Grimm gave the order and didn't say anything else. He closed his eyes and began to recover the energy he'd expended in the battle. At his level, no matter what kind of injuries he suffered, most injuries could be healed by consuming energy. The moment a wound appeared on his body that couldn't be healed, it meant he was at the end of his rope. The mysterious enemy was obviously an extremely powerful law-defying wizard. Compared to him, Grimm's understanding of the power of the law was like a toddler learning to walk. They were not on the same level at all. If not for the AI chip's powerful simulations and calculations, Grimm wouldn't have been able to drag him into a battle of attrition. After the strange battle, Grimm had used a portion of the feedback he'd gained from repelling the Abyss invasion. Most of it had been consumed by the backlash of the laws. While the losses were great, Grimm didn't lose everything. At the very least, he now understood the crux of a battle of laws. If he was attacked by the clone of that Magus of laws again, it would be impossible for him to win. However, with his astral beast bloodline that had just formed, he had a slight chance of killing his opponent. Now, he just had to wait and see which idiot would walk into his hands. Arden family's Wizard Tower. In a secret witchcraft room, Wizard Germain was communicating with the headquarters in the distance through a magic mirror. Domnall's aged face appeared in the crystal. How's it going? Did that Grimm agree to help? My lord, he didn't say anything. He only said that he wanted to gather all the Grade 4 wizards in the Central Region for a meeting, but he didn't promise to help. Wizard Germain looked dejected. Humph, what's there to be disappointed about? His reaction is already beyond our expectations. Aren't they gathering all the Grade 4 magi? You need to get in touch with every single one of them before they gather. You can make any promises you need. Germain, do your best. I've already authorized you to open a hidden resource point. As long as you can rope in any Grade 4 Magus, Don't be stingy in terms of resources and materials. Chapter 1400. Grimm had now become the king of the Central Continent. It only took him a day to gather all the level 4 wizards in the Central Continent at the Arden family's wizard pagoda, waiting for him to summon them. Even Ashton, who had been fighting the invaders in the secondary plane the day before, had to use the teleportation spell formation to teleport to the space fissure twice. From this, it could be seen that Grimm's terrifying presence had left an indelible impression on the people of the Central Continent. After the outbreak of the demon wave, everyone had been busy defending their territories and the secondary plane. They rarely had the time or opportunity to gather together. Hence, taking advantage of this occasion, a few magi who were familiar with each other held a small meeting to exchange the information they had on hand. One had to admit that it was good to have a big tree to lean on. The sudden appearance of a powerful wizard like Grimm in the Central Continent had, to some extent, changed the deep-rooted view that the wizards of the Central Continent were generally weak. Grimm's roar towards the world, when he appeared out of nowhere, had directly affected the situation in the Central Continent. Grimm had single-handedly repelled the attack of the Abyss and resealed the space fissure. He had also intimidated the King of the Forest with his imposing manner. As a result, no top-level magical beasts were seen in the recent beast waves. Although the beast waves had brought terrible disasters and continued unrest to many territories, as long as there were no top-level magical beasts to add fuel to the fire, the disasters would only be disasters and would not escalate to the extent of a disaster. The 3 counties in the south and the 5 territories in the north had been attacked by the beast waves to varying degrees. However, the overall damage was still manageable and did not spread to the entire Central Continent. This situation was far better than what the people had expected. Therefore, everyone was no longer as resistant and opposed to Grimm's powerful position as before. The sorcerer world was a spellcaster civilization where strength was the dominant factor and the strong were respected. Many of the Central Continent's wizards were used to being weak and had forgotten the core elements of the wizard civilization. Faced with a legendary fire wizard who had risen to power, they could only adapt and obey. There was no way they could resist. This point had already been brightened by the blood of some people. The Central Continent had been conservative for too long. The internal structure of the Central Continent was closed and rigid. They could not adapt to the new situation at all. Therefore, the Mana Tide this time was a test, as well as a great opportunity to reshuffle the cards. The sorcerer families that were not suitable for them would slowly decline, and some new sorcerer families would be reborn from their corpses. The one who controlled the rise and fall of this family was undoubtedly the most powerful Crimson family. Thus, as Grimm created miracle after miracle and glory after glory, everyone finally accepted his existence from the bottom of their hearts. They also indirectly acknowledged the Crimson family's transcendent status. Thus, under Grimm's command, even though the family was in a state of war and danger, they didn't hesitate to overcome all difficulties and rush here. The situation of the other Magus families was not too bad. Only Ashton's 2 secondary planes were in trouble. On one hand, there was a riot among the natives, and on the other hand, there was an invasion by creatures from another plane. Although the incidents were different, both made him feel uneasy, and he had no choice but to go there personally to take charge. Ashton suddenly received a meeting notice from his family in the secondary plane. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only helplessly hand over the command to his deputy. He used the teleportation formation to return to his family's territory, then used the public teleportation network to arrive at the wizard pagoda of the Arden family. The bitter battle in another plane, coupled with the bumpy long-distance teleportation, made Ashton a little dizzy the moment he teleported over. But the powerful mental energy of a level 4 wizard allowed him to quickly calm down, and he walked out of the teleportation formation with a solemn expression. A few wizards from the Arden family were already waiting for him, and they quickly bowed to him. They've all arrived? Even Clara is here? Ashton could not help but ask as soon as he stepped out of the teleportation formation. He was familiar with Clara, and naturally wanted to meet her to find out the purpose of this meeting. All the lords have arrived. You're the last one to arrive. A middle-aged wizard in a black robe with a sallow complexion greeted him, reporting the latest situation in a low voice. These bastards, they're always against this and that, but now they're running away so quickly. Ashton cursed in his heart, and decided to set off to find witch Clara. But before he could leave the teleportation hall, a handsome young wizard with the association's badge on his chest blocked his way. Sir Ashton, please wait. A level 3 wizard from the association? Why would someone like this be in the Andrews family's wizard pagoda? Ashton stopped in his tracks, slightly confused, and coldly sized up the other party. All this while, the Wizard Association had been too domineering and overbearing, and their relationship with the Central Wizards was not very harmonious. "Sir, can I have a word with you?" The young wizard led Ashton out of the teleportation hall, past 2 corridors, and stopped in a secluded corner. The young wizard quickly introduced himself. "I'm Germain, from the Wizard Association. I'm here to greet you on behalf of Sir Domhnall." "Domhnall," Ashton muttered. "Why did he send you here?" He knew that Domhnall was one of the core leaders of the Wizard Association, and his identity was a little special. It was very likely that he was a clone of a true lord. Ashton naturally knew a thing or two about such secret. "Sir, you've just arrived, so you might not know. The reason why Mr. Grimm called for this meeting is to send someone to help the Wizard Association." Wizard Germain explained with a smile. "Aid your association? You're joking, right?" Ashton immediately widened his eyes. The association is so powerful, why would they need the Central Wizard's help? Wizard Germain sighed, and could only repeat everything that had happened in the Black Ink Valley. To be honest, he had repeated the same thing more than 10 times in less than a day. Black Ink Valley. Disaster invasion. Mutated beast tide. The situation was collapsing. Ashton silently listened to the other party's description, and a gloating smile appeared on his face. These days, he had been busy with the war in the 2 secondary planes, and had no time to care about matters outside of his family. Now, it seemed that the Wizard Association was also in a mess. For some reason, all the wizards in the Central Wizards seemed to have the same expression on their faces when they heard the news. Wizard Germain was already used to this. "Sir Ashton, our association is currently in urgent need of help from the Central Wizards. If you can promote the aid plan in the meeting, our association is willing to." Speaking up to this point, Wizard Germain's voice suddenly became low, and he switched to communicating with Ashton in secret language. The two then fiercely haggled in that secluded place. After a full 15 minutes, the two still could not come to an agreement. Wizard Germain's face was full of hesitation and awkwardness, as if he could not make a decision at the moment. Ashton's expression suddenly changed, and he listened for a moment before saying, "You still haven't made up your mind? Clara has already informed me to go to the meeting. If I miss this opportunity, I won't agree to any of your conditions." "All right, then everything will be as you wish." Wizard Germain gritted his teeth. "I'll order someone to send the thing you want to your family. I'll be counting on you for the meeting later." Ashton nodded his head in satisfaction. Since the outbreak of the demon wave, this was the only thing that made him happy and satisfied. Although the crisis of the secondary plane couldn't be resolved, with this material, it would make up for what he didn't have. The meeting place of the wizards in the Central Wizards was still in front of the dimensional crack. Grimm condensed a huge cloud of fire and floated it in front of his chest. This way, both sides would not have to shout at each other. Mary and the others were also summoned back when they were chasing after the Grade 4 demons. In just half a month, among the 3 demons that escaped, the 6-armed snake demon was captured by Mary and imprisoned in the Viscero. As for the high-tiered Balrog, the sorcerers killed it and skinned it, turning it into a pile of Tier 4 materials. As for the remaining Quaset, it escaped into the dark forest. It would probably take more effort to catch it. But with this, the central continent was considered to have stabilized. As long as they sent people to guard the dimensional crack after it was sealed, the first wave of the demon wave could be considered to have passed. Although the Grade 4 wizard families were still in a mess, at least their territories were not breached, and their mortal kingdoms were not massacred. This was already a blessing in disguise. Of course, the famous legendary fire wizard in front of him had to play a part in this. Grimm gathered everyone and looked around. He said calmly, "The reason why I've gathered everyone here is because I have a difficult decision to make." Andrews asked Germain to come over and have him explain the situation. Soon enough, Wizard Germain hurried over and explained the purpose of his trip in detail, as though he had never had a private discussion with them before. In the end, Andrews took out the parchment and activated the rune array inside to play the recorded battle projection again. Everyone was shocked. To be honest, it was one thing to have a secret discussion in a warm and safe room, but when they saw the bloody scene on the battlefield, they could not help but feel a little shaken. Chapter 1401. The Magi of the Central Continent were not stupid. They could tell that the invasion at the Deep Ink Valley had exceeded the scope of an ordinary plane invasion. It was a little like a war of laws. The biggest difference between a war of laws and a war of planes was that the former was purer and more direct. A war of planes might involve a lot of interests, resources, population, and knowledge, but a war of laws was purely a battle between factions. In the entire multiverse, the Magi civilization was seen as the source of evil along with the calamities, abyssal creatures, subterranean creatures, and undead creatures. But in essence they were still in completely different camp. Magi and undead were seen as the representatives of lawful evil. They did things by hook or by crook, only seeking the final result. However, within the group, there was a strict hierarchy. When there was no direct conflict of interest, the higher-ups had a weak duty to protect and take care of the weaker ones, while the lower-ups had to follow the wishes of the higher-ups. As for the calamities and abyssal creatures, they were the typical representatives of chaotic evil. In their camps, the superior had absolute control over the inferior, and the inferior did not have any individual power. Both sides were in a position of dominance and being dominated. Moreover, chaotic evil creatures did not have any rules to speak of. Sometimes, even they could not completely control their next move. At least the Magi still followed the basic rules of fair trade, equivalent exchange, and other rules. But the abyssal demons and calamities all believed in the bloody and barbaric rule of whoever has the bigger fist takes everything. They would not make any deals or negotiations with others at all. Killing and plundering occupied almost all of their minds. Therefore, when the abyss invaded the planar world, there was no possibility of negotiation between the two sides. It was impossible for each side to take a step back. They did not care how much land they occupied, nor did they care how rich the land was. They risked their lives to invade other planes just to kill and plunder. Kill all targets that can be killed, and plunder all resources that can be plundered. From life to soul, they would not let a single one of them go. Until that place became a paradise of death, and even the plane origin was plundered. In the end, the broken continent would also be dragged back to the abyss plane, becoming a part of the extremely huge abyss. The calamities were no different from the abyssal demons. They liked to invade one plane after another, using their powerful evil consciousness to pollute the plane origin, thus turning it into their new territory. The corrupted origin of the plane also lost control of itself, distorting all the living creatures living within it into terrifying mutated beasts. Through this method, the Lords of Calamity would have an entire plane's supply of new soldiers. Then, they would order these new subordinates to invade even larger planes, expanding the territory of chaotic laws like a rolling snowball. Therefore, the reason why the Calamities chose to invade the Magus world was because of the conflict between the laws of chaos and the laws of order. Thus, the reason why the Calamities chose to invade the Magus world was ultimately because of the conflict between the laws of chaos and the laws of order. However, in the face of such a collision and invasion of the laws, both sides had no leeway at all. They could only fight with force and see whose fist was tougher in the end. Although the wizards of the Central Continent were not enthusiastic about helping the Sorcerer Association, they could not resist the hatred and rage of the sorcerers' will towards the creatures of disaster. Hence, under the influence of the plane's consciousness, all magi hated these creatures of calamity from the bottom of their hearts. Coupled with the association's enticement, 8 out of the 13 rank 4 magi from the Central Continent chose the aid plan. Andrews, Milva, Mila, Ashton, and Auderic were firmly against sending reinforcements. At a glance, the objectors were all people who were facing huge challenges within their families. With such a big space crack in Andrews' territory, it was destined that he would have to tremble with fear during the entire period of the demonic tide, not daring to relax even a little. Milva was no better off than Andrews. His Anemdar Academy was at war with the underworld. The evil creatures that had been hiding in the dark and gloomy underground space all year round were affected by the magic tide and wanted to come to the surface to plunder. Naturally, Anemdar Academy, which was blocking the exit to the surface, became their primary target. It was said that the two sides had already fought 2 or 3 times on the shallow surface of the underground, and both sides had suffered considerable losses. However, the Anemdar Academy relied on the spell facilities and dense spell traps that had been carefully built over hundreds of years to keep the subterranean creatures at bay. However, relying on their own strength to fight against the entire underworld, no one knew how long Anemdar Academy could last. As for the other 3, Mila, Ashton, and Auderic, they were all unlucky fellows whose territories were facing a severe beast tide or invasion from another plane. Before putting out the fire in their territories, they obviously did not want to invest their strength in Moyuan Valley, which was completely out of reach. Calamity invasion? Then let them invade. With the Magus Association at the front, no matter how terrifying the Calamity Lords were, it would be difficult for them to pass through hundreds of thousands of miles of black forest and wreak havoc in the Central Continent. It was this dark mentality that made them make the choice that best suited their own interests. Out of the 13 rank 4 magi, 8 were willing to fight, while 5 were against it. The remaining choices were left to Grimm and Mary. As the leaders of the Central Continent's magi, they had the power to suppress everyone else. Naturally, their choice would represent the entire Central Continent. Grimm's gaze swept across the faces of the Magi, and a strange expression appeared on his face. He knew that almost half of the 8 Magi who agreed to fight were just there to make up the numbers. They did not really want to help the Magus Association, but they thought that Grimm would never agree to the association's conditions. This way, even if they patted their chests and stood up, they would not have to fight because of Grimm's veto. This way, both sides would owe each other a favor, and it would undoubtedly bring them additional benefits. Grimm laughed involuntarily, and then his expression turned serious as he said in a low voice, "Considering the development of the Magus world, allowing the Calamity creatures to invade is clearly not in the interest of the Magus civilization as a whole. Thus, I've decided to send troops to help the Magus Association." It was as if a huge bomb had been dropped into the depths of a frozen abyss, and the expressions of the Magi present all changed. "Since most of you have agreed to fight, I'll distribute the tasks. The spatial crack cannot be guarded by powerhouses. While I'm leading people to fight, Mary and Andrews will be in charge here to ensure the stability of the plane. Merva, I don't care how you fight with the subterranean world, but I won't allow any subterranean creatures to appear in the Central Continent during this period. Yes, I'll definitely guard the exit." Merva hurriedly wiped the sweat off his forehead, feeling a little glad that he had not chosen to fight because of the temptation of benefits. The situation in Animundo Academy was not looking too good recently. The subterranean creatures were like madmen, constantly attacking the exit on the surface. If he, the person in charge, was transferred to the east, the Academy would no longer be able to suppress the rampaging dark creatures. Mira, Ashton, and Oderic, stay in your family's territory and continue to resist the beast tide. Do not let them break through your defenses and wreak havoc in the central continent. Yes, yes, yes. The three nodded in unison, their foreheads dripping with cold sweat. Monash? Gaia, although you've chosen to fight, the central continent needs powerhouses to hold down the fort. While I'm gone, you'll be in charge of the coordination and safety of the entire central continent. I'll get Meryl and Amelia to work with you. Yes. The Gold Tribe leader took a step forward and nodded in agreement. As for the rest of the Magi, Grimm looked around and said indifferently, "Since you're all so enthusiastic, come with me to fight." The Magi looked at each other and could only bow their heads and accept the order. In the crowd, the weaker ones like Matthew, Nicholas, and the others all had bitter expressions on their faces, as if they had swallowed a gall bladder. Indescribable resentment and grievance burned their souls like wildfire. If they were given another chance, they would never covet that insignificant little benefit and place themselves in the middle of a terrifying clash of laws. That bastard Germain, he's done me in. Right? Doesn't Grimm have a grudge against the Magus Association? Why did he agree to help them? Is there some secret that we don't know about? Everyone, get ready. We'll set off tomorrow. Alright, you guys can go now. Hearing Grimm's order, the Magi from the central continent could only bow and return to the wizard's pagoda. Looking at their bitter and resentful expressions before they left, it was obvious that they wanted to treat Wizard Germain, who had led them into a trap. As for the Magi with ulterior motives, they were curious about Grimm's sudden actions. As soon as the meeting was adjourned, they gathered together and discussed Grimm's intentions behind his actions. Was Grimm a fool? If Grimm was a fool, then the Magi from the central continent who had been suppressed by him were a bunch of idiots who were worse than fools. Was the Magus Association willing to give them enough benefits? As long as Grimm was not crazy, he would not give up on the chance to weaken the Magus Association just because of some external benefits. What were benefits compared to the bigger picture? Even if the Magus Association brought out a mountain of magical crystals, treasures and resources, it would not be as good as the opportunity to watch the Magus Association suffer a great loss of power and allow the other organizations to rise. Therefore, no matter how much they analyzed, they could not find a reason to change Grimm's mind and help the Magus Association. Chapter 1402. If they wanted to reinforce the Wizard Association, sending ordinary wizards would not help at all. To be honest, with the foundation of the Wizard Association, there was no way they would be lacking in basic combat power. The only thing they lacked was top-level combat power. Therefore, the Central Continent's wizards had only chosen 7 Grade 4 wizards, led by Grimm. As for Monash, Gaia and Mary stayed in the central region, not following the team. The central and eastern regions of the continent were tens of thousands of miles apart. If they relied on airships to transfer troops, it would take at least a month. But if they only needed to send a few high-level wizards, the long-distance teleportation formation was the best choice. The only problem was that Grimm had to maintain his 1,000-meter-long body. It would be difficult for the wizards of the association, who specialized in spell formations, to teleport him over. Below the space crack, many spell formation masters were busy for more than 10 hours before they finally built a giant teleportation formation that covered an area of nearly 100 meters. After checking it several times and making sure there were no mistakes, the spell formation masters took out a large amount of energy from the energy room of the wizard's pagoda and poured it into the teleportation formation. As the intensity of the white light increased, The entire space was illuminated by a white light, making it difficult to see anything. Crack, following the sound of space being torn apart, the half-sealed light gate in the space crack started to twist and writhe, gradually expanding. After the spell formation master's modifications, the space crack was no longer connected to the abyssal world, but to the teleportation formation of the Wizard Association. The Level 3 spell formation master in charge of building the teleportation formation was already sweating nervously, but no matter how hard they tried, they could not make the space crack expand even a little. At this time, the spatial rift was only 300 meters tall and 5 meters wide. It was not big enough to accommodate Grimm's huge body. After waiting for a while, Grimm was getting impatient. "All of you back off. Leave the rest to me." With heavy steps, Grimm arrived in front of the great spatial crack. With a loud roar, he gathered the Law of Fire in his palms. When both of his palms were covered in a layer of golden light, Grimm inserted them into the space crack, grabbed the edge of the crack, and tore it apart. Crack, with another explosion, the crack expanded from 300 meters to 500 meters, and its width to 8 meters. Violent void hurricanes blew out of the great rift and struck Grimm's tall and majestic body, creating dazzling sparks and ripples. It was still not enough. The 4% rule heart in Grimm's body suddenly pulsed violently. A large amount of pure fire rule power surged out and penetrated his limbs and bones, instantly activating the fire energy in his body. Our Grimm continued to roar, the muscles on his arms bulging. His golden palms ignored the cutting force of the spatial crack and once again tore it a little wider. Retreat! 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 Grimm's action had scared the wits out of all the low and mid-tier wizards on the spot, and their hearts were filled with fear. As far as they knew, no flesh and blood dared to touch the spatial rift at close range. Spatial powers' terrifying slicing properties were simply irresistible to planar creatures. But now, this legendary fire wizard actually wanted to forcibly pass through the space crack in a moment of impatience. This scared them half to death. Grimm had the protection of the fire rule and 2 divine weapons, so he was naturally unafraid. However, these low-grade magi did not dare to touch the spatial fragment at all. They watched as Grimm tore open the space crack with brute force, causing the spatial fragments to scatter in all directions like raindrop. The void hurricanes also took the opportunity to enter the crack. All the wizards present quickly turned around and ran back to the wizard's pagoda. Clara, Declan, and the rest of the wizards quickly put up an elemental barrier to block the incoming spatial fragment. They looked at Grimm's huge body fighting against the space crack, and it was as if they were watching 2 giant beasts fighting each other. Their eyebrows twitched, and the muscles on their faces tightened. Monster! Monster! There are monsters everywhere these days. After using his strength twice, he finally tore open the space crack to the point where he could barely pass through it. Grimm did not dare to waste any time, and he shouted, "Let's go!" He took the lead and plunged into the void storm. "Let's go too!" Clara and the rest looked at each other, and their faces were full of bitter smiles. With Grimm's actions, the teleportation this time was many times more turbulent than before. All the wizards from the central continent who had agreed to fight had no choice but to put on an elemental barrier and a space barrier before entering the spatial rift. East of the continent, 130 miles south of the Black Ink Valley. Crack, 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 a teleportation spell formation built in an empty valley suddenly lit up with a dazzling white light, and soon after, a pitch-black space crack appeared. "It's starting! It's starting! Someone is coming over. Make sure to maintain the stability of the teleportation spell formation. Shimu, increase the protection of the spell formation." Yes. A series of orders were passed down, and the wizards in charge of maintaining the teleportation spell formation took their positions, guiding the teleportation to completion. However, to their surprise, it seemed that the person being teleported over was a big guy, and the space crack that was torn open was not big enough for him to pass through. Hence, after a series of earth-shattering explosions, the space crack was torn open twice, and a 1,000-meter-tall giant covered in golden light crawled out with difficulty. How could he be so big? The wizard in charge of protecting the teleportation spell formation was dumbfounded, and he suddenly screamed, "Quick! Everyone, take back the War Wizard's pagoda! The teleportation spell formation is about to explode." In the next second, a dozen wizards from the association slipped into the nearby War Wizard's pagoda like rabbits that had been shot by arrows. They had just raised an elemental barrier to protect the pagoda when the teleportation spell formation, which had been torn to its limit, exploded. Ah! The light of law! The 1,000-meter-tall golden giant that Grimm had transformed into let out a roar, and a dark red glow rose around his body, blocking the space fragments from exploding. Only then did he slowly pass through the shattered space crack. The 7 level 4 wizards that had followed Grimm through the teleportation spell formation all crawled out of the huge cloud of dust, their faces covered in dirt. Some of them even had fine space crack marks on their bodies. However, level 4 was still level 4, and these space tremors were not enough to kill them. Such a large formation naturally attracted the attention of some wizards from the high-level association. An old acquaintance of Grimm flew over from the direction of the battlefield with a group of subordinates, and they hovered above the messy teleportation spell formation. "You! How did you become so big?" The newcomer wore a white wizard robe, and his whole body was like a ball of milky white light that was bright and gentle. It was the light elemental envoy, Jaredin. Grimm slowly moved his limbs and examined his body, and only felt relieved when he did not find any injuries. He stood up straight, and his majestic body almost disappeared into the clouds in the sky. Even Jaredin, who was hovering at a height of only his calf. "Oh, it's Jaredin! I'm here to reinforce the Wizard Association. Why don't you welcome me?" Grimm bent down slightly, and his thunderous voice almost deafened Jaredin. "Of course I know you're here to reinforce us, but why did you become so big that even our teleportation spell formation collapsed?" Jaredin had a look of disbelief on his face. He had interacted with Grimm before, and naturally knew how strong he was. It had only been a dozen years, but Grimm's strength had increased by leaps and bounds, to the point where even Jaredin had to look up to him. This kind of huge contrast made it hard for him to adapt to it for a moment. "Don't be so curious. Tell me about the current situation in Muyuan Valley. Also, did the Silver Alliance and the Northern Lands send people here? Don't tell me you only deceived us to come here? How can this be considered deceiving?" Jaredin hurriedly forced a few laughs. "We're part of the mega civilization, so we naturally have to shoulder the hardships together." If it wasn't for the plane's feedback, do you think I'd come here? Tell me, who has come from those two factions?" Jaredin's expression stiffened, and he laughed bitterly. "Although the Silver Alliance has sent many people, there are only 3 Grade 4 Magi who can fight. The one leading them is the Alliance's deputy chairman, Meloni. 5 Magi from the Northern Lands have come, and one of them is the super-powerful Thuna that you're familiar with. Look, they're here just as we're talking." Grimm was tall, so he could naturally see further and clearer than the people present. As if sensing his presence, a group of black figures flew up from not far away and quickly approached him. The one in the lead was a particularly ferocious and terrifying corpse dragon, with 5 witches of different shapes standing on its broad back. The one standing at the front was naturally the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, whom Grimm had dealt with for a long time. "Grimm, I didn't expect you to be here too. Could it be that you have already advanced?" Other Magi might not be able to sense it so deeply, but as a powerful being, Thuna was especially sensitive to the aura of laws. Therefore, when she suddenly approached Grimm, even Thuna was a little surprised when she sensed the majestic power of the law of fire in Grimm's huge body. "Advanced? It's still early. Grim chuckled, Lady Thuna. I didn't expect you to be faster than us. Why, how's the situation in Muyuan Valley? It's good that you haven't advanced. Hearing this, Thuna inexplicably heaved a sigh of relief. She then realized that she had lost her composure and hurriedly forced a smile to cover it up. I just feel that you've stayed at grade 4 for too short a time, and there's a danger of your foundation becoming shallow. It's better to spend more time consolidating. Chapter 1403. There were only 5 witches from the Northlands. Apart from Thuna, the leader of the Witches of Death, the rest were all familiar faces. Themis, a Tier 4 Witch of Death, a necromancer by profession Angelina, a Tier 4 Witch of Deception, class unknown Tessa, a Tier 4 Pale Witch, class unknown. At the end of the group, Grim even saw Circe, the leader of the Dark Witches. Although Circe had hidden herself in a faint layer of black fog, with the difference in strength between the two of them, Grim could easily see through the barrier of darkness and see her true appearance. As if sensing that the barrier of darkness had lost its effect, Circe dispersed the black fog with a wave of her hand, revealing her figure and appearance. She was a strange woman with a tall and graceful figure. Her skin was pale and withered from not seeing the light of day all year round. Her exposed skin was covered in strange, twisted black runes, and from time to time, wisps of dark energy would leak out. She wore black, tight-fitting leather armor, and her entire body was neat and tidy. 2 snake-shaped daggers were sheathed on her belt. Their surfaces were pitch black and did not reflect any light at all. It was impossible to tell what kind of special metal they were made of. Grim scanned the surroundings. With the power of the law's penetrative power, he could almost instantly detect the peculiarities of the other party's body. Even a Tier 4 Dark Witch was almost translucent in his eyes. Aside from a few parts of her body, such as her core organs, which were still shrouded in thick darkness, the rest of her body was practically transparent. Enchanted equipment, energy barriers, and ordinary clothes could not prevent the power of the law from penetrating her body at all. Only witchcraft energy fused with the law of darkness could stop Grim's power of the law. However, it was obvious that this Tier 4 Witch of Death did not possess such a high level of mastery over the law. Hence, she no longer had any secrets in front of Grim. As if sensing Grim's focus, Thuna stomped her foot and a pale aura of death spread out, cutting off Grim's line of sight. What's done is done. With your current strength, you can't possibly bully the weak and seek revenge, right? Besides, without that Vulcan bead, you wouldn't have such frightening power. On the other hand, you should be thanking someone. Grim could not help but laugh at Thuna's sophistry. Bullying the weak? I'm afraid she's much older than me. If it wasn't for you, I definitely wouldn't have let this go. Now that you've spoken, I'll... At this point, Grim snorted lightly. Immediately after, a ball of flame suddenly appeared on Circe's right arm and started burning fiercely. Circe cried out in surprise. She waved her arms, and a large amount of dark energy pounced into the flames. However, not only did it not extinguish the flames, it instead made them burn even more fiercely. Amidst the crackling sounds of the flames, the pungent smell of burnt flesh wafted through the air. That Circe was a ruthless one. Unable to extinguish the strange flames after several attempts, she immediately clenched her teeth and pulled out the dagger at her waist, directly cutting off the flesh that was ignited. Large chunks of flesh and blood splattered out along with the burning flames, revealing a badly mangled wound and a small portion of the eerie white arm bone. But to her horror, a faint red halo actually gathered on the wound once again, and with a poof it ignited into a new flame. This time, the flame directly burned on the arm bone. The witches at the side roared one after another. They either cast witchcraft or used magic wands. All kinds of colorful witchcraft radiance fell on the flames. Suppressed by the joint efforts of the witches, the ball of law flames finally became smaller and smaller. But when it shrunk to the size of a finger, there were no longer any changes. No matter how the witches used the power of law to wash it, or covered it with ice spells, or used some strange sealing spells, they were unable to completely extinguish the golden flame. Seeing that the witches were busy but to no avail, Thuna let out a muffled groan, pursed her lips, and blew on the golden flame, instantly freezing it into a small ice crystal. Stretching out her hand, she pinched the ice crystal between her fingers, raised it in front of her eyes, and carefully examined the vivid and lifelike flame that seemed to be still burning quietly. Thuna said with displeasure, "Is this how you show off your power? Looks like your temper has also grown." Grimm smiled indifferently, not reacting to Thuna's actions too much. He laughed and said, "I only gave her a small punishment. I didn't mean to make things too difficult for her. Since she has already been punished, let's write off everything in the past." Thuna's face was cold and stiff. She stared straight at Grimm, and after a long time, she sighed and said, "She reaped what she sowed, and deserved this evil retribution. All right, let's put this aside. Now we should talk about the main matter. Why did you choose to reinforce the Sorcerer Association? I thought you already hated the association to the bone." "Of course I still remember the past debts, but the disaster invasion is a big event for the entire sorcerer world. How can I just stand by and watch? Besides, they promise so many benefits, and there is a lot of plain feedback for me to take. Why should I not?" "I hope what you said is true." Thuna had a look of "I'd be a fool to believe you," and sighed softly. "You've just arrived here, so you don't know what the situation is like there. Come with me to the front lines later, and you'll know how bad it is. Humph, this time the Sorcerer Association is really in big trouble." After saying that, Thuna glanced at the group of rank 4 Central Continent who were standing orderly not far away, and a strange expression appeared in her eyes. "You're really willing to do this? This place is so dangerous, and you actually brought half of the Central Continent's rank 4 Central Continent here. Be careful, don't let the entire Central Continent's strength be lost here. At that time, even if you have the ability to reach the heavens, you can forget about ruling the entire Central Continent." Grimm smiled and said, "In the past, the Central Continent has always been looked down upon by all of you. Why? Isn't it because they're always at the back of the group, always thinking about safety first? As such, how many grade 4 magicians could survive the carnage of the planar battlefield? This time, there's a rare opportunity to train their troops in the plane, and they're all eager to try, taking the initiative to join the battle. How can I dispel their enthusiasm? It's just killing 2 birds with 1 stone." Seeing the bitter smiles on the many rank 4 Central Continent's faces, Thuna naturally knew that Grimm's words were not true. However, she was not so kind as to worry for the Central Continent. Seeing that the other party was a genius sorcerer, a simple reminder was enough. Let's go take a look at the battlefield together. Perhaps some of you will regret it when we get there." With that, Thuna stomped her foot. After saying that, Thuna stomped her foot. The huge and towering zombie dragon raised its neck and let out a long roar. It turned around with difficulty and flew toward the direction of the distant battle sounds. Yes, just as they were standing there and conversing, earth-shattering roars and roars could be heard from the horizon from time to time. Ferocious wizard light filled the entire palace, and the terrifying energy ripples caused the world to tremble. Even though they were hundreds of miles apart, the aftershocks of the battlefield had clearly spread to this place. This also meant that the Wizard Association could no longer restrict the battlefield to the Black Ink Valley. Wizard Jaredin, who had come to welcome Grimm and his party, had been standing at the side, quietly listening to their conversation. Only at this moment did he politely lead them towards the battlefield. Along the way, the vast area had been completely occupied by the Wizard Association. War Wizard Towers stood at all the key points and intersections, and the roads leading to the Black Ink Valley were filled with long lines of carriages carrying large amounts of basic resources. In the sky, Magi who were riding giant owls or double-headed eagles were circling around, rising and falling, looking extremely busy. However, Grimm's arrival immediately caused chaos on the scene. After all, not everyone had the right to see a terrifying giant that was thousands of meters tall with their own eyes. Looking at this towering figure that seemed to reach the heavens, step by step, and then striding over their heads, all of the sorcerer guards, normal laborers, sorcerer apprentices, and even the low-ranked sorcerers of the association couldn't help but feel a wave of panic in their hearts. The wizard beasts responsible for unloading the goods were so scared that they wet their pants, their limbs trembling as they lay on the ground, unable to get up. The wizards from the association who were riding on flying wizard beasts quickly scattered, not daring to block the terrifying giant's footstep. Even a team of twin-legged flying dragons flew up from a hidden camp nearby, rushing to the front of Grimm's route to help him chase away those who were in his way. After passing through a vast green grassland, crossing a 100-meter-wide river, and flying over a bald rock peak, Grimm and his party quickly arrived at the battlefield in the Black Ink Valley. With his tall figure, he could instantly see the entire battlefield. Even someone as calm as Grimm could not help but furrow his brows. This was the first time he felt the terror of a clash between the forces of a large dimension. This was a massive battlefield that spanned more than 70 miles. Starting from the rock peak where Grimm was standing, the entire battlefield was filled with war wizard towers. Like the stars surrounding the moon, a tall and majestic top-notch wizard tower stood silently in the center of the battlefield. About 30 miles in front of the wizard's tower, a thick layer of fog spread across the ground. Under the cover of the fog, a giant meandering crack in the ground could be vaguely seen. At this moment, there were waves of mutated beasts surging out of the crack, crazily attacking the war wizard towers near the crack. Every war wizard tower was like a small battle hub, and an alarming number of tall wizard beasts surged out of them. Chapter 1404. The sky was a dark red color. The ground was filled with terrifying dark red turbid flows, and the roars of wizard beasts and mutated beasts as they fought could be heard everywhere. The war wizard pagodas had erected energy fields and magical barriers. The entire pagodas were shrouded in light, glowing with magical energy, as dazzling as tall Christmas trees. The former was used to prevent the mutated beasts from getting close, while the latter was used to defend against long-range spells. Every time a horde of mutated beasts approached, the crypt at the bottom of the war wizard pagoda would suddenly open, and an alarming number of terrifying wizard beasts would swarm out. The mutated beasts were a bunch of terrifying monsters whose bodies and souls had been corrupted and distorted by the aura of disaster. They had eagle-like wings, snake-like heads, and lion-like bodies. Their limbs were strong and powerful, and the ends of their claws were curved and sharp. The sharpness of the claws could even tear through a finger-thick full steel plate armor. An ordinary human warrior was no match for them. The wizard beasts were ferocious beasts created by the wizards through bloodline synthesis. Each of them was more than 5 meters tall, and the surface of their bodies had traces of various ferocious beasts. The wizard beasts were far superior to the mutated beasts in terms of size and strength, and their bodies were protected by specially made scales. Hence, they were extremely ferocious in battle. Usually, a single wizard beast could charge left and right in the tide-like horde of mutated beasts, like a giant tank that was not afraid of death. The mutated beasts obviously had the advantage in numbers. They relied on their ability to fly and run, flying and attacking freely on the battlefield. Usually, when a wizard beast appeared, there would be dozens or even hundreds of mutated beasts surrounding it and killing it. Some of the more fearless mutated beasts would directly pounce on the bodies of the mutated beasts, using their fangs or claws to hang onto the mutated beasts, continuously biting and pulling at them. Most of the ferocious wizard beasts could only charge within 100 meters of the horde of mutated beasts, their bodies already pinned to the numerous enemies. They would bite and tear at the mutated beasts with all their might. Usually, after killing a dozen mutated beasts, the wizard beasts would collapse due to their heavy injuries, becoming food for the mutated beasts. Many of the mutated beasts even roared and tore at each other for the flesh of the wizard beasts. Every time this happened, the nearby war wizard pagoda would gather a massive amount of magical energy, transforming it into bolts of terrifying wizard spells that were thrown at the most concentrated areas of the mutated beast. Violent lightning, meteor rain, earth spear flurry, acid rot swamp, blizzard. All sorts of elemental wizard spells of different shapes and colors swept across the battlefield. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, the elemental radiance erupted, and corpses littered the ground. There was not a single mutated beast that could withstand the attacks of the Wizard Tower of War's wizard spells. The wizards of the Association hid within the Wizard of War Tower, relying on the sturdy defense of the tower and the protection of the large number of wizard beasts outside the tower to calmly attack every group of mutated beasts that entered their attack range. But many ants could kill an elephant. If the number of mutated beasts gathered increased, coupled with the surprise attack of the hidden disaster creatures, even the War Wizard Pagoda would not be able to guarantee absolute safety. Grim looked into the distance, and he could see the ruins of the War Wizard Pagodas that only had half of their bases left. They were like candles that had been burned out, and the walls of the pagoda were damaged with countless large holes. It was a mess inside, and one could vaguely see blood and broken bones everywhere. One could estimate the approximate losses of the Wizard Association just by looking at the number of casualties suffered by the War Wizard Pagoda. No matter what, it was a terrifyingly large number that was hard to accept. If it were just mutated beasts, with the powerful foundation of the Wizard Association, it would be impossible for them to be forced to such a state. In the core area of the battlefield where the War Wizard Towers stood, there were hundreds and thousands of powerful creatures of different shapes and sizes, their bodies shrouded in a strange light, occupying the area. They would occasionally form small teams to attack the War Wizard Towers that were heavily surrounded. Most of them were level 3 or 4 terrifying disaster creatures. Even though they did not have a terrifying natural disaster halo that covered a large area like the Disaster Lord, they could still guide the disaster energy to increase their own offensive or defensive abilities. Thus, once they attacked, the War Wizard Pagoda that they had their eyes on would become a terrifying sacrifice of war. No matter how sturdy the Wizard Pagoda's energy field was, no matter how ferocious the attacks of the wizard spells were, no matter how many groups of wizard beasts surrounded and protected it, it still could not stop the surprise attacks of the terrifying disaster creatures. Balls of green corrosive poison spat on the energy field of the War Wizard Pagoda, corroding it into a thin piece of paper in less than half a minute. Then, groups of disaster creatures charged in, charging to the outer perimeter of the wizard's pagoda. They used their majestic bodies to knock the wizard's pagoda until it shook, then used their sharp claws to dig a large hole in the wall of the pagoda that was big enough for them to pass through. As soon as the hole was broken, the disaster creatures rushed inside. A moment later, the shrill screams of the wizards before their deaths came from within the War Wizard Pagoda, accompanied by the rumbling of wizard spells. However, against the foreign creatures with thick skin, high magic resistance, and terrifying disaster abilities, the frail human sorcerers were simply no match for them. Thus, the War Wizard Pagodas fell one after another, the wizards inside either dying or escaping. The losses were hard to calculate. The number of enemies was alarming, and every wizard in the central region who witnessed it felt dizzy, their faces pale. At Grimm's level, he no longer cared about these low-level magical beasts, mutated beasts, and disaster creatures. He squinted his eyes, silently observing a few particularly strong and eye-catching lesser disaster lords among the group of disaster creatures. In essence, they were not worthy of the title of Disaster Lord. At most, they were the subordinates or fighters of a real Disaster Lord. They did not have a fixed body shape or appearance, and the only thing that could distinguish them from other dimensional creatures was the extremely eye-catching aura of chaos. This aura was so incompatible with the laws of the plane that every single one of the calamity creatures was shrouded in a purplish-black fog that could not be dispersed. It was not actually fog, but an anomaly left behind by the collision of two completely opposite auras of laws. The closer one was to the cracked canyon, the more obvious the aura of disaster was, and the more damaged the dimensional law of the wizard world was. As the dimensional law of the wizard world regressed, the dimensional law of the wizard world became weaker and weaker. The demonic wave would last for hundreds of years. Once the disaster creatures adapted to the dimensional law and rushed out of the Black Abyss Valley, they would only bring endless slaughter and terrible disasters to the native creatures of the wizard world. From this point of view, it was only a matter of time before the various forces sent reinforcements to the Wizard Association. After all, everyone was in the same boat. If the disaster creatures broke in and took root here, everyone would be in trouble. Very much so. Fortunately, the ones who targeted the wizard world this time were just some low-level disaster lords, not the lord-level existences of the disaster world. Otherwise, the Wizard Association would have asked for help from the outer realm and begged those great wizards to send some clones or subordinates back to control the situation. It was reported that the sorcerer world this time was targeted by a grade 6 disaster lord called Diarmas. His original body was a three-headed hellhound that was over 100 meters tall. Each of his heads could control a special magical element, and he possessed incomparable strength. The lesser disaster lord Xie Hoof that Grimm met in the Arcane Kingdom was actually a grade 4 aberration clone of Diarmas. This time, Diarmas took advantage of the sorcerer world being attacked by the demonic wave to come and take advantage of it. Of course, such a move had to be retaliated. At the very least, they couldn't let the disaster creatures corrode and transform the Black Abyss Valley into a bridgehead for the disaster plane to invade the sorcerer world. Otherwise, once the real disaster lord broke into the sorcerer world, they would have to pay a price that was thousands of times more severe than it was now. One had to know that the fall of most plane worlds was not caused by natural disaster. Usually, it was due to the invasion of disasters, the abyss, or other evil races that turned it into a land of death. When sorcerers invaded, they would at most plunder some resources and population. They would rarely carry out a destructive attack on the plane world. Only evil races like the calamities, the abyss, and the astral beasts would indiscriminately destroy the origin of a dimensional world, or pollute and mutate the dimensional origin of an entire dimensional world, distorting all the creatures in the dimensional world into obedient mutated beasts. Therefore, when disaster creatures or astral beasts appeared in a plane world, it was often the moment when the world was at its end. However, it was still very difficult for a grade 6 creature like Diarmas to break into the sorcerer world. The huge chaotic energy and aura in its body would trigger the strongest backlash of the sorcerer world's plane law. Therefore, before it really invaded, it would send out a large number of subordinates to drive a steady stream of aberration beasts to pollute and distort the plane law near the spatial rift. This was also one of their most commonly used, sinister methods. If the invaded plane world did not have enough powerful means to repel the attack of the aberration beasts and force its subordinates to retreat, when the spatial barrier was eroded into a hole of sufficient size, it would be the time for the grade 6 disaster lord to make its appearance. With a grade 4 against a grade 6, even if the sorcerers had the local advantage, they would still collapse in the face of its terrifying might. They would then become the target of its wanton slaughter and devour. At that moment, even a powerful being like Thuna would no longer be safe. Powerful sorcerers like Grimm, who had the power of laws but had not reached grade 5, were an indispensable delicacy in the eyes of the disaster lord. Therefore, helping the Sorcerer Association was actually helping itself. Chapter 1405. What's the situation below Black Ink Valley now? Grimm asked in a low voice. Although his question was vague, the Magi present understood what he meant. The magus who led him here, Jaredin, had a gloomy expression as he muttered, "Advanced Grade 4. Hearing this, the many Central Grade 4 Magi who came with the team could not help but burst into an uproar. This meant that the strength of the invading disaster creatures near Black Ink Valley was at the upper limit of Grade 4. Although it was still a small grade away from the true upper limit of the Magus world, with the powerful physique and terrifying fighting style of the disaster creatures, they were actually not far from the pinnacle of Grade 4 super beings. It had to be said that the mutant beasts coming to their deaths over the past few months had indeed weakened the strength of the space barrier near Black Ink Valley. When the laws of the plane could no longer suppress the invading disaster creatures, the Magi would lose the so-called local advantage when fighting the disaster creatures. That was the most terrifying point. "How much time do we have?" Thuna, who was perched on the back of the zombie dragon, asked coldly. 40 days at most. By then, the suppression of the plane's consciousness on the disaster creatures will disappear. By then. Jaredin did not finish his sentence, but the Magi present were all veterans of plane conquest. They could naturally imagine the terrifying consequences. "Where's Domhnall? He called us here. Isn't he going to show himself?" Not far away, a group of Alliance wizards in silver robes flew over and questioned Gerard sternly. Before Gerard could speak, the space around him suddenly wrinkled and twisted like a piece of transparent cloth. The space trembled slightly. When the dense ripples turned into ripples, Domhnall emerged from the void step by step with his staff in hand. "Welcome, Madame Thuna, Deputy Chairman Meloni. Lord Grimm. Welcome." Domhnall apologized to everyone as soon as he appeared. When his gaze landed on Grimm's gigantic body, he was a little absent-minded and paused for a moment when he greeted Grimm. The way he addressed the three leaders revealed some problems. The deputy chairman of the Silver Alliance could not help but look up and size Grimm up. To be honest, Grimm's current state was too strange. His energy aura was obscure and hard to distinguish. It was no wonder that Meloni, who did not know the inside story, could not figure out his true level. However, the purpose of everyone's visit was not to exchange pleasantries, but to deal with the terrifying calamity creatures. Hence, it was Deputy Chairman Meloni who took the lead and asked in a deep voice, "Domner, what's wrong with the Sorcerer Association? You're so powerful, so why did you allow the calamity creatures to take root in the Black Ink Valley and cause such a huge mess?" A hint of awkwardness appeared on Domner's old face. He sighed and said, "Because none of us expected that Dilmas was so eager to rush into the sorcerer world that he actually sent his main body to wait at the spatial fissure below Ink Abyss Valley." "What? Are you sure it's Diarma's real body?" This was the first time everyone had heard of this news, and they couldn't help but be shocked. Dilmas was a Class 6 dire beast, a famous calamity lord in the entire multiverse. If he personally waited there, even if his main body could not cross over, he could still attack through the spatial fissure and cause terrible damage to the sorcerers who went to seal or purify the calamity aura. "It's confirmed." The smile on Domner's face was strangely bitter. Everyone could tell that the Sorcerer Association must have paid a heavy price to verify this information. "Then, what does the association mean?" Meloni asked. "Now, everyone can see that there are more than 1,000 high-level calamity creatures gathered at the entrance of Ink Abyss Valley. Their strength ranges from Class 2 to Class 4, and the biggest headache for us is that there are as many as 21 Class 4 creatures. If we only need to defend the tower, our association's power is more than enough. We can definitely seal these calamity creatures in Ink Abyss Valley. But if we want to expel them and purify the calamity aura in Ink Abyss Valley, we can't do it with our own power. But if we don't find a way to repel these calamity creatures and purify Ink Abyss Valley, the power of laws of the plane won't be able to occupy this place again. Once the chain of laws here is completely shattered, that Class 6 dire beast will be able to get in. At this point, Domner looked around at everyone and sighed. During the demonic tide, the major organizations are also in troubled times, and they are overwhelmed with work. If not for the fact that we have no other way out, I'm afraid I wouldn't have put down my old face to ask you for help. Now that you have a clear understanding of everything here, it's up to you whether you're willing to help or not. Everyone's faces were gloomy. They had no choice. Although they were Tier 4 sorcerers, the number of Class 4 dire beasts on the battlefield was not much less than theirs. There was no such thing as true safety on the battlefield. A moment of carelessness could result in death. Therefore, even Tier 4 sorcerers like them were nervous and uneasy before setting foot on a planar battlefield of this level. We have no problems on our side. Thona was the first to express her stance. As one of the two super-strong witches in the northern region, she naturally had unparalleled prestige among the witches. Therefore, after Thuna expressed her stance, the other rank 4 witches standing behind her did not move. It was obvious that they would follow her lead. We, the Silver Alliance, have no problems either. Since we're here, we naturally have to fight these calamity creatures. Deputy Chairman Meloni of the Silver Alliance also expressed his stance. Behind him, the 7 Silver Alliance sorcerers of different heights and races all had a natural expression, as if they did not care about their own lives. Compared to them, the Tier 4 sorcerers of the Central Continent that Grimm had brought with him were a little unstable. Dilmas must not enter the sorcerer world. Just as the Tier 4 sorcerers of the Central Continent were deep in thought, Grimm's deep voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. In order to achieve this, we, the sorcerers of the Central Continent, are willing to participate in the war. However, Grimm's tall body leaned forward slightly as he stared at Domner. Both sides have never truly worked together before. Furthermore, our battle styles are also different. Hence, we, the Central Continent, will only fight as a group, and will not accept being split up. Hearing this, the expressions of the 7 Tier 4 sorcerers of the Central Continent improved slightly. After all, Grimm's current strength was already enough to suppress the super-powerful beings. Having a powerhouse like him by their side was much better than being incorporated into the association's battle team as cannon fodder. Seconded, we, the Northern Witches, also request to fight as a group. Same for us. We will not accept a single transfer order from the association. Even though it was not perfect, it was reasonable for the 3 factions to make such a request. Hence, Domner thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement. Under Domner and Jaredin's lead, the group continued forward and arrived near the Wizard Tower. The rest of the sorcerers followed Domner and the rest into the Wizard Tower to rest, while Grimm could only stay outside the tower due to his body size. He stood quietly on the spot and adjusted his breathing. In the past battles, even though the Wizard Association had called back all of the Tier 4 sorcerers and super-powerful beings, they were still unable to gain an advantage in terms of strength when faced with an equally large number of disaster creatures. Hence, in the past month, the Association could only adopt a defensive stance, silently relying on the War Wizard Tower and the Wizard Tower to whittle down the enemy's strength. If it were another race, this defensive tactic might work. But it paled in comparison to a powerful race like the disaster creatures that could easily contaminate and mutate an entire dimension. The disaster creatures had the support of several dimensions, and they were not afraid of such a battle of attrition. In fact, many large dimensions that were once famous in the multiverse had been forcefully flattened by the disaster creatures using this unfathomable tactic. Hence, in order to break this vicious cycle, the Wizard Association could only adopt more aggressive and radical tactics. This required the Wizard Association to leave the protection of the Wizard Pagoda and take the initiative to challenge the disaster creatures to whittle down their numbers. After all, while there might be an endless number of mutated beasts, The number of mid-level and high-level disaster creatures was limited. As long as their numbers were whittled down to a certain extent, the Wizard Association would be able to organize a beheading team to launch a surprise attack on the space crack beneath the Ink Abyss Valley. Even though the outcome of the battle was not clear, this was the only method the Wizard Association could come up with. The arrival of the 3 reinforcement teams of sorcerers had undoubtedly attracted the attention of the disaster creatures. This was especially so when Grimm's massive body, which was 1,000 meters tall, stood beside the wizard pagoda. He was indomitable and eye-catching. Anyone who could expand their body to 1,000 meters was not a weakling. Even though ordinary people could also use the swell spell to enlarge their bodies, doing so would be akin to asking for death when facing opponents of the same level. Without sufficient energy to protect their bodies, without sufficient energy to support the circulation of their bodies, it would be understandable if they only wanted to show off and intimidate their opponent. But if they forced their bodies to step onto the battlefield, this was somewhat unimaginable. To be honest, Grimm's appearance had truly shocked the disaster creatures. Chapter 1406. The intensity of the battle intensified with the arrival of the wizard's reinforcements. Under the command of the Level 4 disaster creatures, hordes of mutated beasts crawled out of the cracks in the ground, hissing as they flew into the sky. Fortunately, their wings were not enough to support them to fly more than 100 meters in the air. They could only gather in flocks and fly in the sky like terrifying crows, attempting to charge out of this bloody land surrounded by the War Wizard pagodas. The War Wizard pagodas shone with a blinding magical radiance, using bolts of rapid wizard spells to strike the hordes of mutated beasts into the sky. On the ground, a large group of wizard beasts were entrenched around the War Wizard pagodas, defending against the waves of attacks from the mutated beasts. The wizard beasts and mutated beasts were 2 kinds of specially bred killing machines, unafraid of death, bloodthirsty and cruel. So long as they collided, it would definitely be a shocking and bloody massacre. Both sides were wild beasts without intelligence, and their sole source's killing characteristics were amplified by various terrifying methods. Therefore, they were using a kind of suicidal brutality to wantonly consume their own lives. As the battle continued, the endless stream of mutated beasts gradually gained an advantage in numbers, starting to push back the wizard beasts. Making use of the cracks in the battlefield, the hordes of disaster creatures started to quickly wipe out the lone War Wizard pagodas. As long as there was a tiny crack in any of the War Wizard pagodas, there would be terrifying disaster creatures continuously tearing it apart under the dense cannon fire. When the crack turned into a hole, it was also the moment the War Wizard pagodas announced that they had reached the end of their life. The disaster creatures that swarmed into the War Wizard pagoda ran amok without the slightest scruple. They dragged out every human wizard hiding in the War Wizard pagoda and devoured them alive. Only when the War Wizard pagodas exploded into giant fireworks under the control of the wizards at the back, did this cruel massacre temporarily come to an end. Pushing out layer by layer, the War Wizard pagodas were destroyed one after another, and the situation of the Wizard Association instantly became abnormally serious. And every time this happened, it was time for the high-level wizards to leave the wizard pagodas and start to wipe out the battlefield. Countless black dots flew out from the tall wizard pagodas, slowly approaching the front lines of the battlefield. When they reached a certain distance, all of the wizards stopped in their tracks. The elemental sorcerers spread out and began to silently chant the long and tedious incantation syllables of high-grade witchcraft. The anatomy refinery sorcerers and bloodline sorcerers were scattered around, silently preparing for battle. After 40 to 50 flicks of his fingers, high-rank spells with astonishing power and a large area of effect exploded in the horde of mutated beasts like fireworks. Hundreds and thousands of mutated beasts exploded one after another like canned meat in every space, wreaking havoc and overturning by the spell. A dozen or so huge gaps immediately appeared in the dense horde of mutated beasts on the battlefield. Inside the gap, blood splattered everywhere, and severed limbs were everywhere. The entire ground was instantly filled with black and red wreckage and blood, turning into a terrifying blood swamp. Howl, an ear-piercing screech rang out. On the ground, hordes of mutated beasts soared into the sky, flapping their strange, twisted wings with all their might as they pounced towards the human magi in the sky. The disaster creatures were indescribably excited. They dived into the horde of mutated beasts and used them as cover to sneak towards the battlefield. This time, all of them were magi from the association. There was a total of 43 magi, including 1 super expert, 3 Tier 4 magi, 17 Tier 3 magi, and 22 Tier 2 magi. There were no Tier 1 magi in the team. In a planar war of this level, if ordinary Tier 1 magi were to enter the battlefield, they would not even be able to withstand the aftermath of the battle and would be killed by the enemy in droves. Even those Tier 2 magi were at the peak of Tier 2 and possessed powerful combat abilities. Otherwise, they would be a group of paper men that would scatter at the slightest touch on the battlefield. The enemy is coming, everyone be on your guard. Attention, all anatomy refinery sorcerers, step out and prepare to face the enemy with me. At the forefront of the team, the Tier 4 anatomy refinery sorcerer, Henry, roared loudly, constantly giving out orders. Behind him and at his sides, more than 10 anatomy refinery sorcerers stood out. They were wearing leather armors, cloth robes, and even the magic tools in their hands. However, the only thing they had in common was that there was a faint layer of light flowing on the surface of their bodies, as if they had refined their bodies into some kind of magic tool. Behind the anatomy refinery sorcerers, the bloodline sorceress Neve also screamed. All bloodline sorcerers, prepare to transform. Pay attention to protect the elemental sorcerers beside you. After roaring this sentence, Neve's white robe was suddenly torn apart by her exploding body. Neve's body, which was originally only 7 meters tall, rapidly expanded like a balloon, and the surface of her body was quickly covered with a layer of fine dark green scales. Her head also twisted and deformed, her front mouth protruding forward and splitting into a triangular snake head. Scarlet slender forked snake tongue poked out from the split mouth, hissing in a strange manner. In less than 3 seconds, Neve had already transformed into a terrifying magic snake with a body length of 30 meters and a body diameter of 3 meters. She quickly coiled into a snake formation, her upper body raised high, quietly waiting for the outbreak of war. The rest of the bloodline sorcerers had also completed their bloodline transformation. Some transformed into blood apes, some transformed into large wind elementals, some transformed into 2-headed trolls, and some transformed into demonic giants. With the powerful bloodline transformation ability, the originally frail human sorcerers immediately became powerful beasts that even disaster creatures and abyssal demons did not dare to provoke. As for the group of elemental sorcerers at the back of the team, they all propped up magic shields and colorful elemental defenses, and then continued to use super powerful spells to kill the mutated beasts that pounced on them. The light elemental envoy Gerard stood in the middle of the elemental sorcery. At this moment, he had transformed into a huge light man that people could not look at directly, his whole body bursting with blinding light. 2 milky white rays of light shot out from his eyes, piercing straight into the battlefield and rampaging there. Wherever the rays of light went, the bodies of the mutated beasts seemed to be swallowed and assimilated by the light element. The parts of their bodies that the rays shone on quickly turned milky white, and they quickly disintegrated into countless tiny light particles. In an instant, the sky was filled with stinking purple blood and body parts like raindrops, and the attack of the entire group of mutated beasts seemed to be slightly stagnant. The super-powerful Savorius stood stiffly at the back of the team. His attention was not on the battlefield, but he could not help but look back at Grimm's huge body that was thousands of meters tall. His gaze also alerted Grim. Grim's huge eyes opened and swept a glance at Savorius's body, then closed his eyes to rest without a care. Such a contemptuous action had undoubtedly ignited the fury in Savorius's heart. However, for some reason, his throat was dry and hoarse, and he did not even dare to curse. He could only silently turn his body and stand there resentfully. Just as he was absent-minded, the front of the group of mutated beasts had already collided with the body refinement sorcerers who were stationed at the periphery. In an instant, waves of blood filled the air, and body parts flew everywhere. The entire front line was filled with a powerful and violent force. Whether it was wielding magic weapons or barehanded, the body refinement sorcerers who had tempered their bodies to the point that they were comparable to superalloys were all monsters of flesh with astonishing strength. Every move they made could cause a violent wind vortex that was comparable to that of a rank 2 spell. Every punch they made was like a transparent tornado of wind pressure, and every kick they made was filled with an incomparably violent force. In front of them, the rank 1 and 2 mutated beasts were like a school of fish that had rushed into a violent torrent. Apart from being involuntarily swept away, they also had to bear the wind pressure of thousands of different forces that came from all directions. As a result, groups of mutated beasts that had just rushed to the side of the body refinement sorcerers were cut into pieces by countless transparent blades. They were minced into a sky full of blood paste and minced meat, which then converged into waves of blood that slapped the bodies of the people behind them. The violent waves of blood came one after another, like a huge wave of turbid waves that quickly engulfed the following group of mutated beasts. With such terrifying power and violence, if the group of mutated beasts had even the slightest intelligence, they would have been frightened by the other party's momentum. But at this moment, the ferocious nature of the group of mutated beasts that were not afraid of death drove them to rush into the blood wave without hesitation. Gaga, while letting out ear-piercing screams, the mutated beasts rushed out of the blood wave, ignoring the terrifying wounds on their bodies, and madly rushed towards the nearest enemy. High-grade body refinement sorcerers are a group of impenetrable walls, but this kind of violent force also consumed a lot of their energy. Therefore, in the gap between their punches and kicks, there were still a large group of fish that slipped through the bloodline and rushed to their side. Henry stood at the forefront, calmly looking at the mutated beasts with blood-red eyes, huge fangs and sharp claws pouncing towards him. He didn't seem to be accumulating any energy in his hands, but he quickly punched out with his fist. The front part of the fist compressed the air to form a transparent bullet, punching out in a straight line, penetrating the bodies of more than a dozen mutated beasts in an instant. Under the control of his consciousness, the strong wind around his fist formed a spiraling tornado of wind pressure that kept spreading outwards as he charged forward. All the mutated beasts that were caught in the tornado were like being thrown into a meat grinder, turning into pieces of fine flesh and blood that were swept away. Henry didn't cast any elemental sorcery, just simple and regular punches, turning the space in front of him into a dead zone that no life can set foot in. Whoever enters will die, and those who block will die. Chapter 1407. Horner's berserk behavior obviously provoked the anger of the disaster creatures. Soon, several rank 4 disaster creatures rushed to the front of the battlefield under the cover of the group of mutated beasts. There was a loud explosion. A strange spider ape broke through the blood wave and appeared in front of Horton with a roar. The spider ape is a strange creature formed by the bloodline of the giant berserk ape and the underground spiky spider. Its upper body was like that of a chimpanzee, covered in thick, black hair and bulging muscles. Its lower body was that of an 8-clawed spider, its hairy limbs flickering with gray luster. Like the other disaster creatures, this arachnid ape didn't have any weapons or equipment on it. It only held a black spear with a sharpened tip in its right hand. Looking at the material, it seems to be made of wood. However, Being chosen by a rank 4 disaster creature, and being able to swing it like the wind, this wooden spear is obviously not as ordinary as it looks. As soon as it rushed through the blood wave, the spider ape's 8 hairy legs stepped on the void and pounced towards Horton. "Reckless guy, go to hell!" Horton roared and quickly punched with both fists, blasting many terrifying shells towards the spider ape like cannonballs. The spider ape didn't dodge; instead, it stretched out its arms to protect its face and chest, and rushed straight over. Dong dong dong, several shells hit the spider ape's shoulders, arms, and waist in succession, causing its black hair to flutter and its muscles to tremble, but it didn't hurt it in the slightest. The spider ape rushed to the side, raised its right arm, and thrust the black spear straight towards Horton's chest like a bolt of lightning. As a physique-refining sorcerer, using brute force is their specialty. Horton also clenched his right fist, condensing a pale purple halo on his fist, and bombarded the tip of the spear without hesitation. The tip of the spear collided with the fist, and the violent force wrapped around it collided with each other, immediately turning into a terrifying energy wave that swept in all directions. The physique-refining sorcerers closest to the battlefield were sent flying, but the two strangely didn't move at all. His fist pressed against the tip of the spear, and the muscles on his body trembled, as if he was in a frenzied struggle. In terms of physical strength, both sides were evenly matched, and there was no difference in their strength. In terms of physique and endurance, the arachnid ape had a slight advantage. However, apart from basic vitality and strength, combat also included some external things, such as equipment. When the two of them were in a stalemate, the bracers on Horton's hands, the pendant on his neck, and the belt on his waist lit up with magic runes at the same time. After that, they turned into streams of magic energy that flowed into his body. In the next second, Hwudun's strength increased by nearly half. A violent and majestic force turned into an irresistible force that quickly engulfed his opponent. The arachnid ape was doing its best to resist when it suddenly felt an irresistible force surging towards it. Before it could retreat out of the range of the opponent's attack, Hwudun's iron fist had already knocked away the spear, and his fist landed on its chest. There was a loud bang. The back of the arachnid ape exploded, revealing a bloody hole. Horton's iron fist pierced through it. The arachnid ape was in so much pain that it wanted to die. Its 8 limbs frantically retreated, and it pulled its body out of Horton's fist. It swung its spear even more wildly, the tip of the spear flickering with a black glow, leaving black marks in the air that did not disperse even after a long time. Hwudun had intended to take advantage of the situation and smash the arachnid ape's head, but his charging figure was blocked by the black marks, and he could not get close to the arachnid ape. The middle finger of his right hand that had collided with the spear had already exploded, and there was a small black hole on it. Drops of black blood flowed out of the bloody hole, and the deadly poison contained in the blood turned into wisps of black smoke under the pressure of the violent force and drifted out. Bang bang bang, 3 strangely shaped calamity creatures, all of them tier 4 in strength, broke through the waves of blood and appeared before Horton. The arachnid ape roared in pain. Although there was a large hole in its body, it still bared its teeth and charged forward once more. Hwudun could not help but frown. It had to be known that such terrifying injuries were enough to kill an ordinary creature, but that arachnid ape was still fighting on the battlefield with such vigor. The valiant and ruthless nature of the calamity creatures was evident from this. In a one-on-one duel, Hwudun was confident that he could kill any calamity creature of the same tier with his equipment and technique. However, fighting 1 against 4, no, 3.5, even if Hwudun's strength increased by a small rank, it would still be difficult. And at this critical moment, a poison cannon that covered a radius of 10 meters exploded in the middle of the 3 calamity creatures, following which the bloodline witch Neve, who had transformed into a ferocious snake, quickly slithered over and stood beside Hwudun in front of the 4 calamity creatures. Both sides exchanged blows, each using their own combat skills, and clashed on the front lines of the battlefield. In the middle of the battlefield, the light elemental envoy Jaredin had transformed into a terrifying ball of white light, and two milky white rays shot out from his eyes. Wherever he went, the battlefield was cut up and turned into a complete mess. Even the few level 4 calamity creatures that were fighting fiercely would be penetrated by the white light if they were not careful, and would shriek in pain as they fled to the side. Once a level 4 wizard attacked with all his might, he would indeed have the terrifying power to dominate the battlefield. After the Association's battle team opened up the battlefield in the middle, the other wizard teams that had come as reinforcements flew out of the wizard's pagoda one after another, and began to clean up the mutated beasts and calamity creatures gathered around the cracks in the ground. According to the division of labor that had been discussed, the Association's battle team was in the middle, the Northern Witches and Central Wizards on the left, and the Silver Alliance on the right. They formed a fan shape and began to attack the enemy from both sides. The reason for this division of labor was because of the difference in strength between the various wizard organizations. Although Grimm had appeared in the Central Region, the wizards of the Central Region were still the weakest among all the organizations. The Central Wizard Battle Team had never carried out a group battle, and had never organized a large-scale dimensional war. This was the main weakness of the Central Wizard Battle Team. In such a bloody and cruel dimensional war, the strength of a single person was never enough. Only a team that trusted each other could make use of their strengths and discard their weaknesses, and display the greatest advantage in battle. In this aspect, the wizards of the Central Wizard Battle Team undoubtedly lacked the sense of teamwork, collective thinking, mutual trust, and war spells. What was even more hateful was that even at this moment, there were still some people with ulterior motives who were silently speculating whether this was a method by the legendary fire wizard to kill others with a borrowed knife. Thus, when faced with such a motley crew, it was impossible to control their strength without some thunderous methods. Clara, mid-level level 4, witch, sealer, skilled in dark sealing spells. Declan, low-level level 4, wizard, body-tempering wizard, skilled in close combat. Alfred, mid-level level 4, wizard, elemental wizard, skilled in sound wave spells. Matthew, low-level level 4, wizard, summoner, skilled in summoning powerful creatures from another world. Nicholas, low-level level 4, wizard, elemental wizard, skilled in water spells. Ariza, low-level level 4, wizard, bloodline wizard, able to transform into a human lion. Roderick, low-level level 4, wizard, elemental wizard, skilled in plant spells. Although there seemed to be a variety of talents, combining them into a team capable of fighting against the Tier 4 calamity creatures was enough to make one's heart explode. Although there were many members, the only one who could act as a meat shield was the body-tempering wizard, Declan. Although Ariza was a bloodline wizard and could transform into a human lion, this ancient demonic creature was not proficient in direct combat. Instead, it preferred to use illusions and perception absorption to deceive or tempt its enemies. Thus, it seemed that Declan could only be chosen as the vanguard of this large Tier 4 team. He would then have Matthew summon some thick-skinned otherworld creatures to support him. It was fine if their defense was weak, but this team's attack was also extremely weak. Although they were all elemental wizards, most of them were proficient in single-target, instant-cast spells. As for large-scale, powerful spells that required the protection of others and required a long period of incantation to cast, they were all lacking. It was fine if they did not have any combat spells. As long as they were well-equipped, they should have no problems fighting one-on-one calamity creatures of the same rank, right? However, many of the Central Continent's magi could not even do this. They did have a lot of witchcraft tools and powerful witchcraft tools, but most of them were used to save their lives and escape, and some were used to assist in defense. As for offensive types, it wasn't that there wasn't a single one, but there were very few of them. Truth be told, when Grimm obtained the basic information on the Tier 4 Magi of the Central Continent through various methods, he felt his heart turn cold. At the same time, he finally understood why the three great Magus organizations looked at the Central Continent with disdain. Seeing that the other Magus organizations had already arranged their troops to kill their way to the front lines, Grimm could only sigh inwardly and give a concise command. Declan, you'll be in charge of the front lines. Matthew, you'll summon some powerful monsters to support Declan. Elisa, you'll be in charge of the second line of defense. The rest of you, stay by my side and use long-range spells to clear out the mutated beasts. All right, let's advance. With that said, flames surged around Grimm's body, and in an instant, his entire body was enveloped in scarlet flames that were so hot they were almost white. As he advanced, he casually waved his hand to scatter flame runes. These flame runes were like birds returning to the forest, entering the bodies of the Tier 4 Magi of the Central Continent. In the next moment, red light burst forth from their bodies, and a faint layer of red enveloped them. This is the light of my laws. With it, you won't have to worry about the chaotic laws on the battlefield. Since we're here, let's show the Magi of the other large organizations whether we, the Magi of the Central Continent, are a bunch of trash. Chapter 1408. The higher the level of the battlefield, the more powerful the powerhouses could display their full potential. When Grimm charged into the front line, the entire battlefield was filled with a terrifying pressure that could shake one's soul. It was as if a huge rock had been thrown into a pot of boiling oil. In an instant, the entire battlefield was flipped over. Grimm's burning domain, which he hadn't used for a long time, was unleashed once again. Wherever the 1,000-meter-wide ring of flames went, everyone and everything started burning silently. The low-level wizards of the association were all hiding in the Wizard's Tower of War, so they didn't have to endure the terrifying flames. On the other hand, those shaman beasts and mutated beasts that were exposed to the outside instantly met with a tragedy. They were like a group of ants that were pressed onto a slab of lava and burned, and they didn't struggle for long before they exploded into torches that shot into the sky and were instantly incinerated into ashes. In Grimm's eyes, there was no difference between Level 1 and Level 2 creatures. Once they stepped into the burning domain and touched the ring of flames, only death awaited them. They didn't even have the time to struggle. Even the Level 3 and 4 human wizards would have to bear the scorching heat of the burning domain if they didn't slap fire runes on themselves, let alone these low-level magical beasts. Grimm's 1,000-meter-tall fire giant moved forward, and the mutated beasts exploded into ashes like ants. Wherever the ring of flames extended, the sound of explosions could be heard. The black and red turbid flow that ruled over the entire land was instantly reduced to a sea of red. After burning the closest enemy to him, Grimm took the opportunity to slowly move forward. Wherever the ring of flames went, the mutated beasts that didn't know what fear was were scared out of their wits. They all retreated and hid. Thus, such a ridiculous scene appeared in a corner of the battlefield. A 1,000-meter-tall fire giant chased behind while the mutated beasts scattered in all directions. Some of the more powerful mutated beasts even revealed their sharp claws in order to fight for a path to escape, killing their companions in front of them. Those who escaped too late were caught up by the expanding ring of flames. They couldn't hold on for more than 3 seconds before exploding with a bang. Before the broken corpses, the splashing blood, and the broken bones hit the ground, they had already been blown into black, withered ashes by the terrifyingly hot torrents of fire, which scattered and filled the entire front line. The wizards from the Central Continent flew in front of Grimm and slowly moved forward together with the flame ring. They quietly looked down at the horrifying scene in front of them and below them that resembled a lava hell. Their hearts were extremely shocked and trembling. The majesty of a god, the power to destroy the world, the life and death of all ants, the will to live or die, perhaps. Within this plane, the peak of a magus power was only this much. Even a Tier 4 sorcerer would be shaken by such a terrifying might, so how could these lowly lifeforms withstand it? For a moment, the entire battlefield fell into a deathly silence. Only the shrill screams of the mutant beasts and the heart-shaking sounds of exploding flames could be heard. At the edge of the huge flame ring, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, stood with her head held high on a towering rank 4 zombie dragon. She looked at Grimm's huge burning body from the side. There was no sadness or joy on her delicate and cold face, neither shock nor anger. Her entire body exuded a bone-chilling aura that kept strangers away. Behind her, the few Tier 4 witches were all shocked. This was the first time they had directly experienced the terrifying aura of a powerful magus. This was especially true for Circe and Angelina, the leader of the Deceit Witches, who had a grudge against Grimm in the past. Although they tried to remain calm, the flickering light in their eyes betrayed their inner thoughts. It seemed that when they first heard of Grimm's name, he was just a dispensable ant in their eyes, an ant that occasionally jumped out to annoy them. But now, their true status had undergone a shocking reversal. What were they compared to Grimm, who stood at the peak of the plane? The silver-robed Alliance wizards were just as shocked as the Northern Witches. There was only one super-powerful being in the entire Silver Alliance, and he had to stay in Sky City to prevent any accidents. Therefore, they did not have a super-powerful being in their team this time. At this moment, when they saw the legendary fire wizard displaying his might, apart from being deeply shocked, they were also filled with endless envy. The few Tier 4 puppet masters looked at each other and sighed helplessly. They summoned their magic-armored puppets, entered them, and roared as they rushed into the battlefield. In the Association's battle, Savorius turned around and stared at the terrifying fire god who looked like he could destroy the world. His body trembled like a sieve. He wasn't afraid, but he was filled with hatred and helplessness. His opponent was already so powerful, how could he wash away the humiliation he had suffered? In the towering wizard's pagoda, Gloria rushed to the huge light mirror and stared hatefully at her former opponent. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably, and the surface of her body flickered with a purple light. She was obviously in a frenzy of anger. "This is the legendary fire wizard who fought with you for 100 rounds? Behind him, a young male wizard with a slick face and a green robe chuckled and said, "Why do I feel that it's impossible? You think you can fight against such a terrifying guy with that little combat strength of yours? Don't tell me that his power has just increased. Humph, among all the super-powerful beings I've seen, there's not a single one who can lock the power of laws in advance as a Tier 4 wizard." "Shut up, Amway. If you don't want to fight with me now, then shut the F***ck up." Gloria suddenly turned around, her anger erupting. She glared fiercely at Amway, wanting to tear him into pieces. Even in the face of the threat of a super-powerful being, the young wizard Amway still had a carefree and cheeky look on his face. After all, he was the #1 super-powerful being in the entire Wizard Association. Even if it was Gloria, she would not dare to easily attack him when she was in a rage. Although he appeared to be unconcerned at this moment, a trace of caution and fear involuntarily flashed deep within his eyes when his gaze landed on the imposing figure in the light mirror that was moving forward with great emotion. Damn it, when did such a terrifying newcomer appear in the wizard world? With this kind of power, if he were to fight with him, he might. Thinking of this, Amway did not dare to continue thinking about it. He was afraid that if he followed this train of thought, he would lose the confidence and courage to challenge the other party. In the control hall on the 17th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, Vice Chairman Domner stood silently, also looking at the terrifying power of the fire giant on the light screen. He could not help but let out a sigh. He could no longer suppress him. From now on, even he had to reconsider the way to interact with this legendary fire wizard in the central region. As long as this fire wizard was around, the Wizard Association's coveting of the central region would be futile. With the long lifespan of a super-powerful being, if he were to occupy the central region for 1,000 years, he would definitely be able to develop it into a huge wizard organization that was not any weaker than the Wizard Association. When he thought about how the Wizard Association had become the second most powerful faction in his hands, suppressed by a weak organization for 1,000 years, even someone as calm as him could not help but feel his heart waver. 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Even for a rank 4 magus like him, this period of time was far too long. However, Grimm, who was on a killing spree on the battlefield, did not have the heart to care about the sinister gazes coming from all directions. He focused on his job of roasting monsters. Every mutated beast that entered the burning domain and was ignited by the ring of flames would consume a bit of the flame energy in Grimm's body. The flame energy might not be eye-catching on its own, but when it roamed the battlefield and burned more than 100 mutated beasts every second, it would be a huge burden to Grimm. If Grimm wanted to maintain such a huge body of flames and the shocking effect of the burning domain, he would have to expend a lot of energy on these cannon fodder. However, with the Vulcan orb providing him with a steady stream of pure flame energy, he would not feel tired even if he had to maintain the burning domain for 3 days and 2 nights. He had now become a star on the battlefield, attracting everyone's attention. No matter if it was good, bad, full of surprise, full of hatred, or something else, not a single wizard or creature of disaster could ignore his existence. Their minds and eyes were filled with the terrifying scene of him burning the heavens and destroying the earth with a wave of his hand. Clara and the other wizards of the central region had stepped onto the battlefield anxiously, thinking that it would be a fight to the death. However, following Grimm's flame ring, all the enemies were instantly turned into ashes before they could even get close to him. This kind of domineering and arrogant attitude of looking down on the enemies like ants was simply intoxicating. However, just because the ants couldn't rush over, it didn't mean that the disaster creatures couldn't. A few veteran wizards with rich experience in planar warfare warned in a low voice, "Be careful, the disaster creatures are coming." Before they could finish their words, a group of terrifying disaster creatures of different shapes emerged from the edge of the egg-shaped light screen in the distance. They roared and rushed into the burning domain, completely ignoring the golden flames on their bodies. They stepped on the void with all their might and pounced towards the wizards of the central region. "Prepare to face the enemy! Prepare to face the enemy!" Which Clara screamed loudly and waved the magic wand in her hand. Rays of black light instantly flew towards the enemies. Blindness, slow, weakness, aging, madness, loss of will. A series of dark curses and mysterious sealing spells entered the bodies of the disaster creatures. At the same time, voodoo puppets the size of a palm came out of Clara's sleeve and circled around her. They kept playing and screaming as if they were a group of living creatures. When the black light entered a disaster creature's body, Clara would randomly point at one of the voodoo puppets and shout, "Tendon break!" In the next instant, the speed of the calamity creature that was over a kilometer away suddenly plummeted, and it looked as if it could no longer run. Chapter 1409. Matthew also summoned otherworldly creatures in a frenzy. Very quickly, the thick-skinned human-faced snake, beholder, and devourer appeared from the void. The only physique refinement magus in the team, Declan, stepped forward without hesitation. With a roar, his body expanded from less than 2 meters to 4 meters tall, charging to the front of the team with an imposing manner. Another bloodline sorcerer, Ariza's body also quickly twisted and transformed into a strange lion with a human body. It was a strange creature that stood 3 meters tall, with a muscular humanoid body and a lion's head. The humanoid skin was yellowish-brown, and there was no hair on the surface. Its muscles were well developed, and it looked rather fit. The strange lion's head on its neck had a large mouth with fangs, wide eyes, and a large nose. It looked exceptionally majestic. Although this lion-bodied creature was much more majestic than a human, it was like a tame kitten compared to the creatures of the calamity. It was obvious that it did not excel in strength or physique. After Ariza completed his transformation, he immediately rushed behind Declan and cast a series of bloodline witchcraft at him as fast as the wind. Charm Monster, Greater Illusion, Mirror Image, Suggestion, Perception Absorption. With Ariza's might as a Grade 4 Magus, half of the bloodline spells he cast were negated by the calamity creatures. Only Greater Illusion and Perception Absorption succeeded in the remaining half. As a result, 2 of the disaster creatures that were charging at them were hit just like that. One of them suddenly flashed out and began to fight with a phantom that didn't exist. The other one suddenly turned around on the spot, as if it couldn't find its way. If Ariza and the calamity creatures were the only ones in the battle today, such a method of confusing and trapping the enemy would not help him achieve victory. However, he was followed by a group of Grade 4 elemental magi who did not follow the normal path. Just as the 2 calamity creatures were running around in circles, 3 shockingly powerful Grade 4 spells landed on their heads. Dimensional Sonic Wave Spell. This was contributed by Lord Alfred of Molten City. Water Dragon Strangle. This was contributed by Nicholas. Nature's Wrath. This was contributed by Roderick. However, even if the 3 of them combined their rank 4 spells, it would not be able to match up to the meteorite that streaked across the sky. A crimson meteor with a diameter of 5 meters fell from the sky, bombarding the swarm of disaster creatures. The crimson meteorite immediately exploded and shattered, turning into thousands of pieces of burning lava fragments that flew in all directions, covering an area of several hundred meters. The violent shockwaves immediately made the group of disaster creatures a little dizzy, and the subsequent bombardment of lava rain and lava fragments was even more deadly. The 3 Type 4 calamity creatures that were at the center of the explosion were instantly blasted full of holes, the flames quickly engulfing them. The disaster creatures that managed to escape in time were also affected. All of them were injured, and they fled the range of the rain of fire as if they were running for their lives. Even though they had suffered such a heavy blow, there were still 2 calamity creatures that broke through the layers of spells and charged towards Declan, engaging him in battle. The other calamity creatures also gathered, preparing to encircle this group of human magi who did not know what was good for them. Unfortunately, they were immediately attacked by Grimm's Berserk Fire spell. Fire spells had always been known as the king of the battlefield, and this was not without reason. Coupled with Grimm's power of law, the fire spell that had the effect of the inextinguishable flames became even more violent and ferocious. All the calamity creatures that charged into the battle had to endure the continuous burning of the inextinguishable fire spell. They could only endure the pain and fight the human magi. This increased the burden on them, causing them to lose their rationality due to their rage. In truth, the Central Magi had sent out far more rank 4 Magi than the other 3 Magus organizations, but their results were nothing to write home about. When they fought against the calamity creatures, they were mostly just tangling with them, and it was difficult for them to deal a fatal blow. After all, the calamity creatures were cruel and tyrannical. If they were forced into a corner, the Magi would be in danger if they retaliated. It was precisely because they did not have the courage and determination to perish together with the enemy that the Magi were able to rampage on the battlefield even though the calamity creatures were riddled with scars and injuries. In contrast, the Magi of the Central Magi were gradually being suppressed by the calamity creatures. To put it bluntly, the entire situation in the Central Continent was supported by Grimm alone. If Grimm did not do anything, the Magi of the Central Magi would have long since collapsed. Grimm stood at the back of the battle, using fire spells to support them as he sighed inwardly. The Central Magi were really weak. No matter how dissatisfied he was, Grimm could not allow his troops to be crushed by the calamity creatures. After all, This concerned his reputation as a legendary fire magus. AI chip, analyze the battlefield. I need to find a breakthrough point. The beep. Scanning the battlefield. Discovered a total of 11 high-grade calamity creatures and 24 rank 3 calamity creatures. More detailed information is still being scanned. Beep. Magus Ariza is in danger. Location: XXX. 2 rank 4 calamity creatures are surrounding him, requesting immediate assistance. Grim, who was standing tall, threw out a lava fireball that exploded at a specific location on the battlefield. The violent and ferocious shockwave of flames immediately blew away the 2 calamity creatures that were trying to surround Ariza, temporarily alleviating the danger he was in. Beep. Declan is currently being attacked by 3 calamity creatures. The enemy might break through at any time. Without a word, Grim raised his hands, and a pillar of scarlet flames shot into the sky 100 meters in front of Declan. The scarlet flames swept towards the enemies in the surroundings. The 3 rank 4 calamity creatures dodged in panic, and their attacks on Declan were slowed down. Magus Clara is too far away. A calamity creature is launching an invisible ambush. Grim's eyes brightened, and 2 thick golden streaks of flames swept across the horizon. When the streaks reached a place not too far away from Magus Clara, a strange demonic tiger with a pair of wings and a horn on its head leapt out of thin air, dodging Grim's attack by a hair's breadth. Seeing this, Magus Clara screamed and waved her hands rapidly. Immediately, numerous black and gray halos shot towards the demonic tiger's head. Upon seeing this, the opponent hurriedly leapt out of the attack's range, and the ambush ended in failure, relying on the AI chip's all-encompassing surveillance and Grim's unstoppable flames of laws. The many rank 4 calamity creatures of the central continent went from being flustered at the start to being orderly. Very quickly they got through the most difficult period of adjustment. When they realized that there was an ultimate being overseeing them, and that they could fight freely without fear of dying, they naturally got rid of their worries. They began to think about how to work together, and how to deal the greatest blow to the enemy. With tacit cooperation and mutual assistance, everyone would be able to unleash their full potential. Hence, with Grim's indirect and direct encouragement, the selfish rank 4 calamity creatures of the central continent finally abandoned their narrow-minded thoughts and began to wholeheartedly contribute their strength to the group. After all, they were rank 4 calamity creatures. Even a slight change in their mental outlook and battle style was reflected on the battlefield, as if they had been reborn. Alfred was an expert in soundwave spells, and was far stronger than his peers when it came to locating, scouting, and sensing invisible creatures. He took the initiative to stand out and act as the vanguard of the team, using tyrannical notes to disrupt the enemy's formation. This immediately gave Magus Clara, Matthew, and the others with weaker defenses an additional layer of protection. Nicholas was an expert in water spells, and he had the effects of mirror clone and water well teleportation. When he selflessly contributed his strength, all the members of the team had special effects such as water refraction, mirror clone, and so on. At the center of the team, a well-hidden and exquisite teleportation well appeared. If any member of the team sensed danger, they could use the teleportation well to run to another area and continue fighting. This was another way to escape from the enemy's pursuit and quickly move away. As for Wizard Roderick, he was an expert in plant-type spells. They could both attack and defend, and they also had powerful healing effect. Under his command, a large natural barrier enveloped the entire team. Any member of the team could touch the natural light within the barrier to recover their physical body and spiritual force to a certain extent. He also commanded a large number of creeper monsters to desperately block the attacks of the disaster creatures. In the past, the rank 4 calamity creatures of the central continent were too selfish. Even when they were fighting in a team, they rarely thought about their comrades, let alone using their own strength to strengthen and protect them. When they tried it for the first time, they quickly received positive feedback. The entire team became orderly in dealing with the calamity creatures, and with Grim patching up any gaps and using his powerful fire spells to cover for them, it was impossible for the battle to fall apart in an instant. With confidence and fighting spirit, the Central Continent wizards had a much easier time fighting. Using the disaster creatures to train their troops, in every corner of the battlefield, there was always a group of people quietly watching the battle of the rank 4 calamity creatures of the Central Continent. The unimaginable scene in front of them left them speechless. They shook their heads and sighed. Chapter 14:10. If they could control the situation, it would be a heaven-defying move. If they couldn't, it would just be a tragic accident. Although everyone knew Grim's intention, they couldn't imitate him even if they wanted to. It was because they weren't strong enough. Grim used his burning domain to isolate all the mutated beasts, which also prevented the mutated beasts and the disaster creatures from helping each other. If the disaster creatures wanted to attack the central wizards, they could only brace themselves and charge into Grim's burning domain. Although the rank 4 disaster creatures had magic resistance, they wouldn't be burned to ashes by Grim's burning domain. But the constant burning of the immortal flame was a huge burden to them. At least, they had to use 30% to 40% of their strength to resist the burning domain. That way, they wouldn't be able to attack the wizards with all their strength. What made the disaster creatures even angrier was the 1,000-meter-tall burning man standing far behind them, Grim. Every time the disaster creatures organized a fierce attack, Grim would throw a huge fireball at them from afar. In order to avoid the flames, the formation of the calamity creatures collapsed and became difficult to regroup. The disaster creatures couldn't gather their strength into a fist, but on the other side, the rank 4 wizards from the central wizards were getting more and more proficient. They had already begun to form a team. Under the influence of many factors, the rank 4 wizards from the central wizards had already killed 2 rank 4 and 6 rank 3 vicious beasts. Such a huge success had undoubtedly stimulated their fighting spirit and confidence. Even those who had grudges and disagreements with each other in the past had begun to cooperate and fight together in a proper manner. This brought more and more pressure to the disaster creatures. The battle on the battlefield was intense, but the group of lesser disaster lords hiding in the fog in the valley were already arguing. They weren't blind or deaf. Just from the familiar aura, they could link the 1,000-meter-tall fire giant to the burning will that caused the law to fluctuate. This was obviously a rank 4 wizard who had the power of a rank 5 wizard. Just digesting this information had drained the lesser disaster lords of all their strength, not to mention how they were going to deal with this huge fiery figure. Their main bodies might be very powerful in the outer realm, but once they entered the sorcerer world, the upper limit of their strength would be limited to the pinnacle of grade 4. If they were to suddenly encounter such a powerful magus with super-ranked methods, perhaps all of the lesser lords present would be in danger of dying here. Those low-tier mutated beasts might not have intelligence, but these high-tier lifeforms had terrifying intelligence that matched their status and level. Naturally, they were unwilling to pay such a price that did not make up for the loss. Hence, how to fight this terrifying fire wizard became the center of their intense discussion. Some did not believe it and thought that the fire wizard was just an empty shell. As long as a few lesser disaster lords worked together to launch a surprise attack on him, they would be able to kill him on the battlefield. There were also lesser disaster lords who suggested sending a few of their companions to keep the fire wizard busy while they looked for a way out from the other wizards. However, in that case, the biggest problem was who was going to hold back the fire wizard. After much pushing and shoving, this difficult and arduous task fell to the strongest powerhouse, 5 Faces, as expected. 5 Faces was a terrifying multi-headed snake lizard, also at the pinnacle of grade 4 strength. In the previous battle with the Sorcerer Association, it had fought 1 against 3 of the association's super powerhouses, forcing them to retreat. Now that it was the legendary fire wizard, they all agreed on the same thing. There were a total of 5 pinnacle grade 4 lesser disaster lords present, each of them possessing terrifying might and the power of laws that others could not compare to. Now that the human sorcerers were launching a large-scale attack, with the intention of driving them out of the sorcerer world in one go, these ruthless lesser disaster lords naturally had to prepare for a strong counterattack. After the discussion was over, the lesser disaster lords immediately recalled their subordinates on the battlefield and rushed out of the valley with heavy steps without hesitation. This movement on the battlefield immediately attracted the attention of all the sorcerer organizations. All the sorcerers at the front retreated and regrouped. Seeing this, the 7 grade 4 sorcerers in the middle hurriedly retreated and hovered beside Grimm's tall and imposing figure, waiting for his instructions. After the edification of this battle, everyone completely understood. Without Grimm's support, the sorcerers of the central region were nothing in this planar battlefield. If they wanted to survive, they had to cling onto Grimm's thigh. At the critical moment, only Grimm had the ability to rescue them from the jaws of the ferocious creatures of disaster. As for his so-called companions, they were already lucky enough to be able to protect themselves. Ignoring the wild imaginations of the central region sorcerers, the moment the lesser disaster lords appeared, the Sorcerer Association also made a big move. Hundreds of human sorcerers flew out from the Wizard's Pagoda at the back of the battlefield, with the Grade 4 sorcerers in the center, led by Domner. "Looks like they can't wait to fight us." Grimm slowly stepped forward and transmitted his voice. "When the battle starts, don't get too close, and don't leave the range of my flame halo. Be careful." Upon hearing the voice transmission, the Magi of the Central Continent immediately regained their confidence and gathered around Grimm, looking like loyal guards. Only the scheming Clara, Alfred, and a few others frowned, not daring to get too close to Grimm. They knew in their hearts that once the battle started, Grimm would definitely be the main force of the human sorcerers. At that time, Grimm's surroundings would be one of the most dangerous places on the battlefield. Thus, whether they were close or far away from Grimm would be a test of their eyesight and awareness of the battlefield situation. The group held their breaths, silently sizing up the terrifying creatures that had emerged from the depths of the dark Ink Valley. The more they looked, the deeper their frowns became. In the end, all the sorcerers' brows were tightly knitted, their hearts filled with worry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 damn it, there are 5 peak grade 4 creatures of disaster. This battle is not going to be easy. The biggest difference between ordinary creatures of disaster and lesser disaster lords was whether or not they had the halo of disaster. The halo of disaster referred to the light of a domain condensed from the power of laws. As long as one stepped into the domain, they would be attacked by the terrifying power of laws. As for the power of laws, only grade 4 sorcerers who had grasped the power of laws could withstand it. As for sorcerers below grade 4, they were like helpless rabbits in front of the power of laws. The only difference between them and ordinary mortals was that they would die a little slower and suffer a little more pain. Apart from that, there was no difference. At the front of the line was a multi-headed snake lizard with 5 weird heads. Its body was densely covered in dark green scales, and its 4 short, thick legs supported its huge and bloated body. The 5 raised heads were concentrated in the front half of the head, and each of them was facing a different direction. "Lord Grimm, it looks like we'll have to work together. Do you see that multi-headed serpentine lizard? It's called 5 Faces. The scales on its 5 heads are of different colors, and they all have different elemental attribute. The red one is fire, the white one is hurricane, the blue one is ice, and the brown one is rock. The main head in the middle is green, which means that its main attribute is poison." Domner was obviously trying to rope Grimm in, and he pointed at the multi-headed serpentine lizard in the distance while introducing it to him with a solemn expression. Grimm's towering figure stopped at the center of the battlefield, his expression calm as he observed the powerful enemy in front of him. While Domner's introduction was useful to him, It was not as detailed and comprehensive as what he had experienced personally. That multi-headed serpentine lizard was most likely a grade 5 creature, and it was only because it was in the Magus world that its strength was suppressed to the peak of grade 4. Such a fellow's physique and understanding of laws far surpassed the limits of a grade 4 Magus, and could even suppress ordinary powerful beings. Grimm sensed the existence of a strange power of law on its body that was close to 100 meters long. AI chip, can you detect the basic attributes of its laws? Beep. Information gathering complete. Target creature. 5 faces. Target rank. Grade 5, can only display peak grade 4 strength in the plane. Target race. Serpentine lizard. Target's basic attributes. Strength greater than 45. Agility greater than 18. Vitality greater than 52. Spirit greater than 48. Calamity halo. Power of laws. Poison plus force of disaster. Poison is the main attribute of the target creature, and force of disaster is the basic attribute that all calamity creatures share. A host has to guard against the invasion of these two laws when fighting, especially the latter, which can corrupt the host's spiritual force and cause the host to gradually lose control of the law of fire. Method of protection. Book of Darkness. A host has to be enveloped by the light of laws of the Book of Darkness at all times. Once the light of laws is broken, the host's own law of fire can protect his spiritual force for 11 seconds. More than 11 seconds, and the host's spiritual force may be corrupted. Hearing the AI chip's analysis, Grimm could not help but frown and grumble. Law of 2 elements? Just that poison alone is troublesome enough. Why do I need to resist the force of disaster as well? If it can obtain the power of disaster, won't there be any response from the plane's conscient if I fight here? Beep. Established communication with a high-level consciousness. High energy flow detected. Requesting host's instructions to interrupt? Damn, interrupt what? This is a free blessing from the plane. Connect immediately. In the next second, Grimm's consciousness seemed to be immersed in a warm stream of water. A strange energy flowed in from the void plane and fused with his own law of fire, turning into a strange power of law. Chapter 14:11. The power of calamity was not the same as the aura of calamity. Any powerful creature that came from the calamity plane would have a lingering aura of calamity in their flesh, blood, hair, bones, and teeth. Wherever they passed, the aura of calamity would contaminate matter and the mind, causing the environment there to slowly move closer to the calamity plane. This aura of calamity was a mark unique to the calamity plane. The power of calamity was the power of the world, a mark that the calamity plane left in the souls of powerful creatures. This power was not inherent to the creatures of the calamity plane, but a portion of the calamity plane's world force that they used to borrow the power of chaos. Those that could use the power of calamity were the top creatures of the calamity plane, and the density of the power of calamity in their bodies represented how much the plane cared for them. Correspondingly, the lesser calamity lords could use the power of calamity to strengthen themselves. Grimm, who fought on his own, would naturally enjoy the favor of the Magus world's consciousness. Hence, with the AI chip as a bridge, Grimm's consciousness probed into the plane of laws, vaguely making contact with the vast and chaotic consciousness of the Magus world. In the next second, a torrent of energy that he had never felt before surged into Grimm's consciousness, making him feel warm all over as if he had returned to his mother's womb. This torrent not only gave Grimm a deeper understanding of the laws of the world and the laws of the plane, but also a deep hatred towards these invaders. This time, he had no choice but to fight. Grimm, who had turned into a 1,000-meter-tall giant, took a step forward and bent down towards the dark mass of calamity creatures in the distance, letting out a deafening roar. "Get out of this world!" This was not what Grimm wanted to say, but a roar that he had involuntarily let out after absorbing the power of the Magus world. This roar represented the extreme hatred and disgust of the Magus world's consciousness towards these invaders, as well as the rejection and hatred of the Magus world's power towards the power of calamity that they had brought with them. After roaring this sentence, Grimm's 1,000-meter-tall crimson flame body suddenly emitted a blinding golden radiance, illuminating the entire battlefield in a golden light. Bathed in this golden radiance, all the wizards present had a layer of golden halo condensed on their bodies. With the protection of this golden halo, the Magi no longer had to worry about being infected by the power of calamity. While the wizards were checking the attributes of the golden glow, Grimm had already taken the lead. He condensed a golden fireball the size of a mountain in his hands and hurled it towards the enemy camp. Bastard, this is the power of the world. Gloria gnashed her teeth. Domnor could not help but sigh again. He can already activate the world power, which means that he has been acknowledged by the wizard Will Cough. Although Domnor did not finish his words, all the wizards of the association could feel what he was trying to convey. This was their main battlefield, but an outsider had actually stolen the limelight of the main character. They were even more miserable. They had actually been reduced to a bunch of bystanders, small fries. Thinking of this, they felt extremely disgusted, as if they had eaten a plate of flies. Many of the association's Magi were even secretly cursing the bias of the wizard Will. However, no matter how unwilling they were and how much they complained, as the Magus world's power penetrated their minds, they felt the same as Grimm. From the depths of their hearts and souls, hatred and disgust towards the creatures of calamity surged. As such, the ordinary Grade 4 Magi roared and charged forward as if they had seen their enemies from their past lives. Only the super powerhouses at the peak of Grade 4 could use the power of laws to protect their minds and not be completely bewitched by the power of the world. They did not lose their minds and charge forward to fight with their lives on the line. However, just by looking at their increasingly bloodshot eyes, one could tell that no matter how strong their willpower was, they would not be able to hold on for long. Looks like the plane's consciousness has already sensed the threat of the creatures of calamity. It's urging us to chase the enemy away as soon as possible. Domnor sighed. The plane's consciousness is really profiteering. Seeing that Grimm is stronger than us, it directly transferred the plane's blessing to him. The young wizard Onley, who had just returned from the depths of the galaxy, could not help but laugh. Domnor, it's not your first day in contact with the plane's consciousness. It has always been like this. It's just that when it looked after you in the past, it gave you the illusion that you were the ruler of this world. That's why you're so disappointed now. Haha, when you go to the depths of the galaxy and visit a few more plane consciousnesses, you'll understand that they're much more realistic and profiteering than humans. Alright, I'm not going to chat with you guys anymore. I'm going to charge forward for a while and accumulate more plane feedback. That thing is a top-notch resource. With that, a violent and fierce aura that was not any weaker than Grimm's rose from Onley's body, and his entire body rushed to the front of the battlefield with a thunderous roar. I'm going to. You be careful. Gloria once again glared at the indomitable figure of the violent fire giant at the end of her line of sight. She threw this sentence at Domnor, and a mysterious purple light as thick as armor surrounded her body as she also rushed into the battlefield. Although Domnor was a Grade 4, he was not good at fighting. Thus, he suppressed the surging battle intent in his heart and silently observed the battlefield. There were 5 peak-grade lesser lords of disaster on the other side, and there were as many as 7 super-powerful beings on the other side. The situation was still quite balanced. However, the legendary fire wizard Grimm was in a special state, and he had the blessing of the plane's consciousness. It should not be a problem for him to crush the ordinary lesser lords of disaster. Looking at it this way, the other side still had a huge advantage. While Domnor was silently calculating under the protection of the wizard's pagoda, the northern witches also began to move. On the back of the zombie dragon, the leader of the Deceit witches, Angelina, could not help but step forward and ask, "Lady Thuna, the association and the central continent have already gone up. What do you think we?" As she spoke, her body trembled slightly, and a red light burst from her eyes. It was obvious that she was using her powerful spiritual will to fight against the surging battle intent in the depths of her soul. The other 3 grade, 4 witches behind her were in a similar situation, barely suppressing the boiling battle intent in their hearts. Thuna, who stood proudly on the zombie dragon's head, was silent for a moment and finally spoke. "The plane's consciousness is already angry, but we can't lose our rationality. Fighting is a must, but how you fight depends on your own heart. Let's go, and let us fight to our heart's content with these detestable creatures of disaster." Hearing her declaration of battle, the eyes of the northern witches turned red at the same time, and a wild and tyrannical battle intent burst forth from their bodies. The huge zombie dragon spread its wings, and with a low, hoarse and terrifying dragon roar, it pounced towards the front line where the flames of war had suddenly erupted. As for the Silver Alliance, they did not have any powerful beings to hold the line. Even a powerful magus like Meloni could not resist the temptation of the plane's consciousness. As soon as Grimm launched his attack, he had already roared and led the Alliance's magi to charge forward. The entire battlefield instantly entered a state of white-hot war. The whole battle was indeed started by Grimm, but his body was too large. Even though he was throwing flames while taking large strides forward, the Association's magi still managed to arrive before him. This was a battle between high-rank creatures. There was no room for mid-rank and low-rank creatures to intervene at all. Not to mention Grimm's heaven-defying burning domain, just the aftermath of a battle between 2 high-rank creatures was enough to crush low-rank creatures with insufficient strength into powder. Therefore, the entire battlefield was filled with Grade 4 creatures. There were no creatures below Grade 4. Multi-headed snake lizards, multi-armed giants, giant winged serpents, evil sand spirits, 10-headed ghosts. The 5 lesser disaster lords each took up a position, leading their Tier 4 subordinates as they charged at the human magi. Grimm's golden eyes, which were as large as mountains, immediately locked onto the strongest multi-headed snake lizard, the 5-faced serpent. The latter's 5 raised serpent heads stared at Grimm in unison, and the depths of its 10 differently colored serpent eyes emitted a sinister and twisted glint. "Go to hell, ugly freak!" Grimm condensed 2 large fireballs from afar, and frantically poured energy into them. Now, his body was surging with the boundless law of fire and the mysterious force of the world. The 2 combined to form a strange and powerful force that even the AI chip could not analyze at the moment. The AI chip's energy projection showed that the energy within the fireballs continued to rise, breaking through many boundaries that even Grimm could not imagine. 8,000 degrees, 9,000 degrees, 10,000 degrees. When the energy level of the fireballs reached 10,000 degrees, the crimson light that they emitted was restrained, turning into a translucent milky white. This time, even the 5-faced Hydra lizard became a little anxious. One had to know that in the sorcerer world, a normal rank 4 sorcerer could only reach the energy level of 2,000 to 3,000. Even the powerful Gloria could only reach the level of 7,000. And now Grimm could casually condense a fireball that could reach 10,000 degrees. This was clearly beyond the limits of the Magus world. If not for the force of the world opening a backdoor for him, Grimm would not have been able to achieve this even if he had another 1,000 years. Sensing the terrifying might of the berserk fireball in his hands, Grimm roared and threw it without hesitation. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.